Welcome to the cloistered cage, where the doors are locked, the windows are grimy, and the only escape route is a prayer, a miracle. So you think you want to be a monk? Great. Welcome to the grand, soul-crushing, foot-binding, vow-enslaving circus that was medieval monastic life. Buckle up, because it's a one-way ticket to a spiritual sweatshop with a side of eternal boredom. First step, you knock on the monastery door, probably after a grueling journey on a muddy, goat-infested trail, and hope the abbot is in a good mood. Spoiler, he's never in a good mood. He's too busy contemplating his own reflection in a tarnished, algae-ridden basin, wondering if your soul is worth the aggravation. Once you're in, the real fun begins. No more sunbathing on the village green or chasing after that girl you secretly adore or despise. Nope, your new life is about as glamorous as a rat's honeymoon suite. The initiation? A series of humiliations so profound, they make a modern hazing look like a friendly game of hopscotch. You kneel before the abbot, who looks like he's been sucking on sour lemons for a century, and vow your everlasting devotion on the condition that you surrender every shred of your individuality, your personal hygiene, and your ability to complain. You are now property of the monastery. Congratulations. Your new name? Probably something Latin, like Gaius the Pious, which sounds more like a brand of mold than a person. And the vows? Oh, they're charming. Poverty, chastity, obedience, and the last one, especially, is a doozy. Obedience means your every waking thought is subordinate to the whims of the monastery's hierarchy. Think of it as a spiritual version of Yes, Master, except the master's a grumpy old monk with a face like a dried prune and a temper that could curdle milk. You're not just giving up your worldly possessions, your shiny sword, your flashy clothes, your prized pig butt, also your opinions, your dreams, your right to complain about the endless, soul-sucking routines. Because in the medieval mind, free will is a dangerous toy, best locked away in a box labeled bad ideas. Speaking of routines, welcome to the daily grind. Wake up at the crack of dawn, because God's work begins with a 4 a.m. bell that sounds like a dying goose. Breakfast? Ha! It's usually a bowl of porridge that tastes like a mix of old socks and despair, served with a side of bitter herbal tea that's more mud than liquid. Your options for sustenance are so limited they make prison food look like a gourmet banquet. No spices, no variety, no joy, just a bland, hot swamp of mystery ingredients that somehow sustain you long enough to contemplate your existence. And then there's the toileting ritual, joy. Medieval toileting is a humiliation ritual that would make even the most hardened prisoner blush. No toilet paper, no flushing, no privacy, just a hole in the ground and a congregation of flies, fleas, and whatever else is crawling around. You squat over a cesspit, trying not to slip into the muck, all the while contemplating whether your life was better before you signed up for this. Small talk, try not to breathe too deeply, or you risk inhaling a foul cloud of methane and despair. Your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt, and your dignity, long gone. The entire process is less about hygiene and more about reminding you that you are a human animal, and the world is a hot swamp of mystery ingredients. Gender roles? Oh, they're a riot. Women in monasteries? Think of them as spiritual sidekicks, expected to perform endless chores, bear children if allowed, and look saintly while doing it. Their lives are a constant balancing act of modesty, humility, and the unspoken fear that if they step out of line, they'll be branded as witches or worse. Men? Well, they're the ones with the authority, which means they get to boss everyone around, be served, and occasionally indulge in a bit of secret Vespers mischief if they're lucky. But mostly, they're just grumpy old men with bad breath, worse temperaments, and a penchant for wielding power like a rusty sickle. And what about the spiritual side? Oh, the spiritual side is a joy. Every hour, you're expected to pray loudly, incessantly, with the kind of fervor that makes your throat raw and your mind wander to more pleasant things. The Psalms become your lullabies and your nightmares. Your soul is a fragile glass ornament, constantly threatened by the chaos of your own thoughts, which are often about escaping, about finding a way out of this religious prison without getting caught. Because if you're caught sneaking a glance at the outside world, say, a passing bird or a distant church bell, the punishment is swift and brutal. Flogging, extra prayers, or worse. You're a monk. You're a prisoner. You're a human, with all the complex, messy, wonderful flaws that the monastery would prefer to ignore. And at the end of it all, after years of monotony, suffering, and silent screams, what do you get? A faint hope of salvation, maybe, if the stars align and your prayers are sufficiently devout. Or a lifetime of regrets, a smile that looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt, and a soul so battered it's surprised to still be kicking. Welcome to the cloistered cage, where the only thing more confined than your body is your spirit. And the worst part? You signed up for it. Oh, the divine fashion statement of the medieval monk, the tonsure. Think of it as the holy graffiti of humility, a crown of shaved scalp that screams, "I'm closer to God because I'm bald, and I've lost all sense of personal grooming." Or, more accurately, I've surrendered to a divine decree that your hair is a sinful nest of vanity. So whether you're a novice or a seasoned friar, the process is the same. A ritualistic scalp scrape, a barber's blade, and a whole lot of spiritual humiliation. No fancy scissors, no styling gel, no hair gel, no hair, just a bald, shiny, and perpetually unwashed dome that looks like it belongs to a ghost or a particularly overzealous egg. And let's not forget the humiliation aspect. Because what could be more mortifying than voluntarily walking around with a scalp that's been pecked at by a rusty knife, looking like a plucked chicken? It's not just about the look-o, no, it's about signaling your surrender to the divine, your rejection of earthly vanity, and your willingness to look like something pulled from a haunted crypt. To the outside world, you're a walking billboard of spiritual purity, but on the inside, you're a hot swamp of mystery ingredients, sweat, dirt, and the unholy odor of 1,000 unwashed days. Speaking of odor, medieval hygiene choices are a masterclass in how bad can it get. So whether you're a monk, a peasant, or a wandering bard, cleanliness is optional, optional, optional. Toilets? Never heard of it. Soap? A myth. Shampoo? A fairy tale. Your scalp? An open invitation for dirt, lice, fleas, and whatever else is crawling around in the medieval equivalent of a petting zoo. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. They love your shiny, hairless pate. They nestle in the nape of your neck because why not? You're a walking buffet for vermin, and your scalp's shiny surface makes a perfect landing pad for their tiny, disgusting feet. And oh, the fun of the tonsure ritual itself. It's less about hygiene and more about ritualistic humiliation and enforced look that screams, "I'm holy, but I look like I lost a battle with a weed whacker." The monks would sit, often in a semicircle, while a senior monk with a rusty blade or a dull razor would commence the scalp slicing. The process? A messy, uneven affair, more hack job than haircut. Sometimes it's a quick shave, sometimes a gradual process of teasing out patches of hair. Each snip a reminder that beauty, in the eyes of the church, was a sin. The shape? Usually a circle or a patch of baldness at the crown, a visual cue that you're anointed with your own spiritual shame. The shape matters too. The Celtic tonsure, more like a half moon, was popular in Ireland, making you look like a lunar eclipse. The Roman tonsure, a bald patch at the crown with hair left around the edges, was the other big look, like a halo, but in a very unflattering, patchy way. Either way, it was a badge of shame that marked you from the moment you entered the monastery, a badge that told everyone, yes, I am a holy man, but I am also a walking billboard for spiritual sacrifice and bad hygiene. And the process itself? Oh, it's a brutal, humiliating ordeal. Imagine sitting still, trying not to squirm as a grumpy old friar digs a rusty blade into your scalp, scraping, slicing, and shaving with all the delicacy of a butcher working on a side of beef. Small talk? Try not to breathe too deeply, or you'll inhale a cloud of dust, sweat, and the unmistakable scent of unwashed flesh. It's a ritual of patience, of suffering, of surrender, because what's a little pain when you're aiming for salvation? Your head is a canvas of divine humility, and the scars are badges of faith, or, more accurately, scars of, I'm too poor to afford a decent haircut. Let's not forget the cultural implications. The tonsure isn't just about looking holy, it's about looking unmistakably unappealing. It's a visual cue to everyone around. Yes, I've forsaken vanity, but I've also forsaken basic hygiene, comfort, and sanity. It transforms you into a walking, talking symbol of spiritual austerity, a human billboard advertising that cleanliness is a sin unless you count the dirt that cements itself into your scalp like medieval glue. In a way, the tonsure is the medieval monk's version of a bad haircut, except it's not just bad. It's a badge of devotion, a badge of shame, and a badge of the kind of misery that only a divine power could endorse. It's a scalp-shaving ritual that's less about hygiene and more about humiliation, a visual testament to the fact that in the Middle Ages, looking like a washed-up scarecrow was the ultimate sign of piety. And so, whether you're sitting in a monastery, a cathedral, or just wandering the streets looking like a shiny, bald ghost, remember this. The medieval tonsure isn't just hair removal. It's a cosmic joke, a divine punishment, and the ultimate fashion statement of spiritual austerity, because in the Middle Ages, looking unwashed, humiliated, and perpetually hairless was a sacred duty. Medieval meal prep, the culinary equivalent of a bad joke told by a drunk bard at dawn. You think modern diets are boring? Welcome to the grand spectacle of gruel, a soupy, lumpy, borderline mystery concoction that served as the breakfast, lunch, dinner, and possibly the afterlife reminder for every monk, peasant, and unfortunate soul trapped in the cloister of medieval existence. It's not just food, it's a daily ritual of endurance, a test of stamina and taste buds, if you could call them that. Because, really, what's the flavor profile of medieval gruel? Think. A hot swamp of mystery ingredients simmered into a sad, beige sludge that looks like someone spilled a giant bowl of wallpaper paste and decided to eat it anyway. Your options? 0. You don't slice it. You don't season it. You don't complain well, not out loud anyway. No salt, no pepper, no paprika, no hot sauce. Just the unyielding, unrelenting flavor of blandness, flavored only by the despair of knowing that tomorrow's breakfast will be exactly the same. Flavor comes from onions, salt, and peanut. You're lucky enough to get any salt, which was often reserved for the wealthy or used as currency. Peasants, they got whatever was left, which usually amounted to a handful of barley, some questionable grains, and a splash of water that had been sitting in a bucket since the last monsoon. Think of it as medieval fast food if fast meant wait until the next famine. And speaking of famine, the entire medieval diet was a cruel game of culinary Russian roulette. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. The fleas love nothing better than to dive into your bowl of gruel because, hey, why not add a little extra protein? And if you're lucky, the gruel might contain bits of moldy bread or a hot swamp of mystery ingredients that look like they crawled out of a swamp, only to be boiled into the same pot. Your stomach, a battlefield. Your intestines, an ancient crumbling fortress besieged by parasites and despair. Now, let's talk about the ritual of eating. Medieval monks, for example, had a strict schedule. Breakfast at dawn, lunch mid-morning, dinner before the sun dipped behind the cloister walls if they were lucky. No sunblock, no hat, unless you fashioned one out of straw like a desperate scarecrow. They sat in silence, the only sounds they're chewing, if you could call it that, more like a series of choked, pathetic squelches. The act of eating was less about nourishment and more about survival. Swallowing that porridge was akin to forcing down a wet, gritty brick. But you did it because the alternative was starvation, or worse, being caught dead without your daily dose of gruel, which was tantamount to social death anyway. And the utensils? Medieval toileting is a humiliation ritual, and so is medieval dining. No forks, no spoons, just your hands, which, let's be honest, were probably just as grimy as the contents of your bowl. You'd scoop up your slop, wipe your face on your sleeve, and hope the monk's cleanliness is next to godliness. Mantra was more than just a theological joke. Small talk? Forget it. Try not to breathe too deeply, or risk inhaling a mouthful of bacteria that could have starred in its own horror movie. Your hands? Likely caked with dirt, bits of food, and the remnants of last week's plague. Hygiene? Medieval monks believed in spiritual cleansing, not soap and water. Those were luxuries reserved for the wealthy or for saints who could afford to be spotless. And let's not forget that, in the grand medieval culinary scheme, the whole point of your diet was austerity. So, Whether you're a monk or a peasant, you're basically eating the same sad, unseasoned porridge. The only difference? The peasant's gruel might include a pinch of salt if they're lucky, while the monk's was probably fortified with prayers and guilt. But in the end, the outcome was the same. A steaming bowl of monotony, flavored only by the existential dread that you're going to be doing this tomorrow and the day after that, until the end of your miserable, grain-stuffed days. And oh, the boredom. Imagine the endless, unchanging routine of swallowing the same bland sludge, day after day, year after year. The monotony gnaws at your soul like a rat gnawing at a piece of moldy cheese. It's a culinary purgatory, a punishment for your sins if you're a monk, that is. The suffering is compounded by the fact that medieval food was a cruel approximation of nourishment, not enjoyment. It's survival, not celebration. It's the grim, unvarnished truth. Your meal is a beige, lukewarm confession of your insignificance, served in a bowl that's probably been used for centuries, just like your hope for better taste. In the end, medieval meal prep isn't just about what you eat, it's about what you endure. It's a daily ritual of swallowing your pride, your dignity, and the last remnants of your taste buds. It's a grim reminder that in the Middle Ages, the only thing more brutal than the sword was the act of feeding oneself. And the real kicker? The gruel never got better. It just got colder, more lumpy, and filled with more existential dread because, in that dark, damp, and miserable kitchen of history, the only thing you could count on was that tomorrow's meal would be just as soul-crushing as today's. Cheers to that, medieval monks. Cheers. Ah, the communal latrineth medieval throne room of shame and universal discomfort. Picture this, a damp, foul-smelling pit in the middle of the monastery yard, surrounded by crude stone walls or, if you're feeling fancy, a wooden fence with more holes than Swiss cheese. No doors, no privacy screens, no do not disturb signs, just a collective, unspoken agreement that everyone, from the lowliest peasant to the highest abbot, will share the same stench and the same unglamorous chore. And what's that chore? Sitting there, in your tunic, trying not to vomit, while the person next to you is doing the same, possibly humming a hymn that sounds more like a death rattle. Toilet paper? Never heard of it. No. Your only options are a handful of moss, a rag that's probably been used more times than your grandmother's sewing kit, or if you're feeling particularly daring, a handful of straw, which is basically medieval equivalent of a soggy, itchy sponge. The concept of wiping, a cruel joke. You're a peasant. You're a peasant. You're a peasant. Because in medieval times, hygiene was a matter of luck, not science, and the idea that cleanliness might be a virtue was as alien as the concept of germ theory. Your backside is a battlefield, a hot swamp of mystery ingredients, some of which are probably alive, and all of which are unidentifiable. And the smell? Oh, the smell. Imagine the worst sewer you've ever encountered, magnified by hundreds, maybe thousands of years of accumulated filth. It's a noxious fog that clings to your clothes, your hair, your very soul. The air itself seems to conspire against you, thick with the stench of human waste, animal droppings, and the unwashed masses. Small talk? Forget it. No one dares breathe too deeply unless they want to join the swarm of flies circling above, or worse, be the next to lose their lunch in the mud. Speaking of flies, those tiny, relentless pests are the true monarchs of the latrine. They thrive here, buzzing in a relentless frenzy, diving into the steaming muck like it's some sort of medieval five-star buffet. They crawl over your legs, your face, your hair, and you're pretty sure they're plotting to carry some of that filth back to your bedroll, turning your life into a never-ending cycle of itching and despair. Your only hope? Swatting them away like a lunatic, but that just spreads the chaos. It's a symphony of buzzing, splattering, and the distant, sinister giggles of rats lurking beneath the wooden planks. The privilege of the latrine doesn't end with the smell or the bugs. No, it's also about the physical act itself, an exercise in humiliation, contortion, and basic human dignity's slow erosion. You squat, because standing would be sacrilege, and you cling to the rough stone or wood, trying to balance amidst the chaos of your own bodily functions. There's no running water, no flushing, no drainage system, just a hole in the earth that's been used so many times it resembles a miniature volcano, constantly bubbling with the aftermath of countless medieval number twos. Sometimes, the waste piles up so high that it threatens to overflow its pit, turning your daily visit into an apocalyptic ritual. And let's not forget the aftermath cleanup is a myth. Soap, hand washing, nah. You rinse your hands in a bucket of cold water, which is probably contaminated with last week's leftovers, and hope for the best. Your fingers still smell like a compost heap. Your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt. The stink clings to you like a second skin, a badge of honor or shame, depending on how you see it. But the real kicker? The entire system is designed to keep you humble, to remind you of your place in the grand hierarchy of misery. Because in medieval toileting is a humiliation ritual, a reminder that your body's natural functions are always a step away from chaos, filth, and ruin. No privacy, no dignity, no relief, just an ongoing battle with the human condition, played out in a pit of despair that's more akin to a torture chamber than a bathroom. And the worst part? You get used to it. Your nose gets desensitized, your sense of smell dulled by years of exposure. You learn to accept the flies as part of the decor. You accept the grime, the stink, the constant threat of disease, because it's the only toilet you've ever known. It's not just a bathroom. It's a medieval rite of passage, a grotesque dance with human waste, a reminder that in the Middle Ages, even the most basic act of hygiene was a ceremony of endurance, humiliation, and survival. Welcome to the royal court of filth, where the throne is a hole in the ground, and your dignity is the price of admission. Imagine this. Night falls. The candle flickers its last breath. Silence? Ah, that's a cruel joke played by the universe. No, what you get is a symphony of snoring choirs, a cacophony of nasal gongs, and the relentless chorus of fellow monks so committed to their nasal opera that even the devil himself might consider a booking. Your sleeping arrangements? Straw mattress Sisyph. You can call them that lumpy, sagging, and probably crawling with things that aren't invited. Think of it, a bed made of sharp, itchy straw, poking into your back like 1,000 tiny malicious needles. No memory foam, no plush luxury, just a bed of hay, as if the universe decided your spine deserved to be broken nightly. And snoring? Oh yes, you're not alone in this medieval nightmare. No, you're part of a choir, unintentional, unholy choir whose members compete for the loudest, most soul-crushing snore. It's less a sound and more a seismic event, like the earth itself groaning in protest. The guy in the next cell? He sounds like a boar caught in a trap, his snore reverberating off stone walls, bouncing back at you like an ancient curse. It's a constant reminder that sleep in a monastery isn't about rest. It's about survival against a relentless, noise-induced assault. You might as well try to drown out a thunderstorm with a whisper. Spoiler, it's impossible. And let's talk about that magical medieval invention, the night chant. You know, the chants that don't stop, ever. Night after night, the monks belt out their psalms, their hymns, their prayers, whatever divine chorus they've committed to memory at a volume that could wake the dead, if the dead had ears and a sense of humor. It's not sacred ambiance. It's auditory torture. Imagine lying there, hoping to catch a few winks, only to be serenaded by a chorus that sounds like a herd of goats with a vocal coach. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the chants. And if that's not enough to keep you awake, consider the environment. The air, thick with the scent of damp straw, sweat, and whatever filth has accumulated in the darkness, probably a hot swamp of mystery ingredients that would make a modern sewage plant blush. Your nose is assaulted by a symphony of odors, none of which are conducive to sleep unless your idea of bliss involves inhaling a mixture of mold, more mold, and the faint aroma of unwashed bodies. No air conditioning, no heating, just the cold, damp stone walls and the occasional rat scurrying over your feet, apparently enjoying the nightly symphony just as much as you. And speaking of rats, they're part of the nightly entertainment too. Tiny, beady-eyed freeloaders who see your straw mattress as their personal buffet. They squeak their approval, nibbling on your belongings, maybe even sharing a midnight snack with the fleas, which by this point are practically the house pets of the monastery. Fleas? You don't just get fleas, you get a flea circus, a literal blood-sucking, itch-inducing parade that makes you wish for the sweet relief of death or at least a bug spray. But no, medieval toileting is a humiliation ritual, and fleas? They're just part of the package. Oh, and the privacy? Forget it. You're stacked cheek to cheek with your fellow monks, a human sardine tin of spiritual brotherhood. You're not sleeping. You're sharing a communal nightmare. No doors, no curtains, just open space, and the constant threat of someone's elbow in your ribs or someone's snore in your ear. Privacy? That's a modern luxury, one that medieval monks could only dream about, probably while trying to drown out the endless night chants with their own muffled curses. And who gets the prime spot? The abbot, naturally. He probably gets a slightly larger, less lumpy straw bed, maybe a tiny bit less noise if he's feeling generous. The rest? Well, you're lucky if your bed isn't also a nest for mites, or if the rats haven't claimed it as their own territory. Sleep? A distant memory, replaced by a nightly game of, how much noise can I endure before I lose my mind? And the crescendo? It's an overwhelming, never-ending symphony of discomfort, a grotesque lullaby that mocks the concept of rest itself. The ultimate irony? Medieval monks supposedly spiritual seekers are trapped in this endless, noisy, itchy, stinky purgatory where sleep is less a respite and more a cruel tease. Their bed? A pile of straw. Their night? A relentless nightmare of noise, odor, and vermin. Their sanctuary? A stone cell that offers no sanctuary at all. The whole experience? An epic, absurd, and infuriating testament to the fact that in the Middle Ages, even sleep had to be endured as a form of penance. And if you thought modern insomnia was bad, just thank your lucky stars you're not trying to catch Z's in a monastery. Because medieval sleeping arrangements? They were less about rest and more about suffering an unholy union of straw, snoring, and chants that haunted even the most dedicated of monks. Let's talk about sex. Or rather, the lack of it. Because in the medieval monastery, sex was a forbidden, fruit-rotten, moldy, and guarded by a squad of stern-faced monks wielding more guilt than a Catholic guilt trip at Christmas. Imagine signing up for a life where the only thing you get to do with your body is kneel, chant, and hope that your soul doesn't get sucked into eternal damnation for thinking about a woman or a man or a cow or whatever else your wild imagination might conjure in the dead of night. Celibacy? Yeah, that's the official policy. But behind those cloistered walls, the real story? Suppression so thick you could cut it with a dull spoon. The idea of not having sex? It's like telling a lion not to roar or a toddler not to tantrum when denied candy. It's unnatural, unthinkable, and surprise, a recipe for secret misery. Because everyone's secretly miserable. The monks? They're basically walking time bombs of repressed desire, their smiles looking like something pulled from a haunted crypt. Their eyes flicker with the sparks of forbidden thoughts, but they're chained to their vows tighter than a miser clutching his last gold coin. They're supposed to be holy, pure, sanctified, holier than thou. But inside they're a hot swamp of mystery ingredients. Longing, frustration, a dash of guilt, and a sprinkle of shame. And what about the rumors? Oh, the rumors. Whispered behind the heavy oak doors, in the hushed corners of cloisters where the dust of centuries clings to every word. Secret trysts, clandestine exchanges, hidden touches that feel like stolen fire in a world of shadows. But shh, that is the forbidden knowledge. Because if the church caught wind of monks sneaking a glance at a maiden's anklet alone, heaven forbid, actual sex, the punishment was swift, brutal, and often involving more than just a stern lecture, flogging, exile, or worse. Because clearly the church believed that denying men and women the basic biological urge would make them better saints. Spoiler, it didn't. It just made them miserable, cranky, and prone to sneaking around with a face that looks like someone just told them their favorite relic is a fake. And let's not forget the why behind this enforced chastity religion. The big boss in the sky, who apparently had a monopoly on all things pleasurable, decreed that monks must abstain no sex, no fun, no joy, just endless prayer and self-flagellation. Because nothing says divine love like denying your body's most natural instincts, right? It's as if the church thought that human desire was some kind of demonic infection that needed to be cured with a lifetime of cold showers, prayer, and the occasional whipping. They believed that the soul's salvation depended on it. The problem? The soul's salvation often looked like a perpetually frustrated, semi-mad man with a smile that screams, "I'm holding back a scream." And what about the consequences? Well, they're as predictable as a bad joke. Repressed passions turn into superstition, gossip, and a whole lot of internalized rage. Imagine a monastery where everyone's walking around with the patience of a bomb ticking only instead of a timed explosion. It's a lifetime of unfulfilled desire. No wonder many monks turned into chronic complainers, bitter old men whose smiles are as hollow as a dried-up well. They're like living, breathing monuments to frustration mummies wrapped in vows of chastity, their eyes haunted by the ghosts of what could have been. And let's be honest, the sex ban wasn't just about spiritual purity. It was also a way for the church to control over bodies, over desires, over the very essence of what makes us human. Because if everyone is too busy fighting off urges, they're less likely to question authority, to rebel, or to think about the fact that maybe, just maybe, the whole system is a massive, centuries-old scam. Think about it. Celibacy as a virtue, or just a way to keep monks docile, obedient, and forever under the church's thumb? The conspiracy runs deep, so deep that even today, we're still trying to unpack how a bunch of dudes in robes managed to convince millions that denying themselves the simplest pleasures was somehow divine. And the irony? The monks, the most, supposedly, holy among us, are often the most miserable. Because repression isn't sanctity, it's a slow, agonizing death of the human spirit. They're locked in a prison of their own making, with the key thrown into the abyss. The real tragedy? They think they're doing the Lord's work. Meanwhile, their bodies are screaming, "Let us out," and their minds are spiraling into fantasies they dare not admit. It's a medieval version of the secret office crush X. Instead of a glance across the cubicle, it's a lifetime of silent suffering, cloaked in robes, hiding a fire that no amount of prayer can extinguish. So whether you're a peasant or a baron, the one universal truth of medieval celibacy? It sucked. It sucked harder than a black plague rat in a tight tunnel. It turned the most spiritual of pursuits into a torturous game of denial, a humiliating ritual where the only prize was a lifetime of buried desire and haunted dreams. Because in the end, repression isn't purity, it's a slow, inevitable decay, a secret misery wrapped in a false halo, and everyone knew it. They just didn't dare say it out loud, because that would be heresy. Let's start with the breakfast of champions, or, more accurately, the breakfast of the utterly exhausted. Because if you were a medieval monk, your mornings kicked off with a delightful dose of manual labor. Farming in the rain, for example, isn't exactly the kind of gig you'd sign up for if you had a choice. Imagine awakening at the crack of dawn, which, in medieval times, was probably just a faint suggestion from the sunif it dared to show itself, then trudging out into the muddy fields while the sky was still yawning, and the clouds looked suspiciously like a giant, wet blanket. Rain, snow, hail, doesn't matter. Monks didn't get sick days, and their crops sure as hell didn't care about the weather. They just grew, or failed to grow, while the monks' hands turned into a sopping mess of calluses and mystery ingredients that no chef would dare to cook with. And farming? It's a grim, sweaty, back-breaking routine that turns your soul into a soggy sponge soaked with dirt, despair, and the occasional insect. You're a peasant. You're a peasant. You're a peasant. Because that's all monks were, peasant laborers with a fancy robe and a prayer book. They tilled, they sowed, they harrowed, and when the soil was too stubborn or too soaked to cooperate, they cursed the skies and hoped for divine intervention. Spoiler: the divine was busy ignoring them, probably because it was too busy punishing sinners or playing a cosmic game of hide and seek. So whether it was planting wheat, tending to vegetables, or herding a few stubborn chickens, which by the way had no respect for authority, the monk's life was a relentless cycle of dirt, sweat, and existential dread. But farming was just the warm-up act. Once the fields were somehow miraculous plowed, it was time to switch gears and become a scribe, copying holy texts by candlelight in the freezing cold. Because nothing screams medieval comfort like carving out illuminated manuscripts in a drafty stone monastery, with frozen fingers stiff enough to make the finest calligraphy look like a drunken spider's web. The process? Tedious doesn't even begin to cover it. You'd sit for hours, hunched over parchment, your hand cramping as you painstakingly trace letters, each one a tiny, agonizing battle against fatigue and boredom. Copying scriptures wasn't just a job. It was a form of medieval torture with ink and vellum. No spell check, no typo correction, no undo button. Just the relentless, soul-sucking task of reproducing the word so many times that even the angels would start to question divine inspiration. And the cold? Oh, that's a bonus feature. Imagine working in a monastery draft so fierce it could freeze the tears on your cheeks before they hit the floor. Your fingers stiffen into claws. Your nose turns a shade of purple that would make a bruise jealous. No central heating, unless you count a tiny, smoky fireplace that barely warms the room and that, if it's working at all, is probably spewing more smoke than warmth. Your only consolation? The hope that your hands don't freeze mid-letter and turn your masterpiece into a grotesque, abstract art piece. Small comfort, really. No sunblock, no hat, unless you fashioned one out of straw like a desperate scarecrow standing guard against the elements and, ironically, against any hope of comfort. Then, there's the prayer parto, the endless, soul-crushing prayer part. Monks spent hours, centuries chanting, praying, reciting, beseeching, pleading. Their voices echo through stone corridors like the ghost of a bad DJ trying to spin a tune that no one wants to hear. And all for what? To appease a deity that, frankly, seemed to have a wicked sense of humor. It's like praying for a miracle while standing ankle-deep in a swamp of misery, surrounded by the odor of unwashed bodies, damp robes, and the faint aroma of despair. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. So whether you're copying manuscripts or tilling fields, the main theme is the same: toil, mess, and a never-ending desire for just one day off. And don't forget the daily ritual praying for a miracle, or at least a sign that life isn't just endless drudgery. Because in medieval monastic life, miracles weren't a rare bonus, they were the divine coupon for a day off. But miracles? They're about as common as a sunny day in a thunderstorm. So, you pray, you hope, you beg, you chant, and the universe? It probably just yawns, flicks a fly off its divine nose, and goes back to ignoring your pleas. Meanwhile, you keep plowing, copying, praying, and praying some more because that's the medieval monk's version of a life well lived. A perpetual loop of chores, cold, and divine indifference. In the end, monastic chores weren't just about keeping busy, they were a brutal form of medieval entertainment, a way to remind monks that, despite their vows of humility and piety, they were still at the mercy of the elements, the clock, and their own exhausted bodies. Farming in the rain, copying in the cold, praying for a miracler. More realistically, a day off was a brutal, relentless, soul-sucking cycle that turned monks into walking, praying, scribbling, mud-stained zombies. And the worst part? They didn't even get a thank you. Imagine this. It's 2 a.m. The candle flickers ominously, casting elongated shadows that dance like drunken specters on the stone walls. Somewhere in the monastery's bowels, you're awake. Not because you want to be. No, your eyelids are glued shut by the weight of yesterday's unwashed linen, and your toes are numb, tingling like tiny frozen sausages. But your duty? To chant psalms. Forever. Until dawn. Or until someone accidentally stubs a toe on the cold, unforgiving stone floor. God's alarm clock? It's a bell. Or maybe the abbot's irritable cough. Either way, it's a wake-up call wrapped in guilt and guilt's ugly cousin, obligation. And so, here you are. Awake. The entire universe conspires to keep you that way, your body's natural rebellion squashed under layers of wool and guilt. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. The fleas that think your toes are a free, all-you-can-eat buffet. They don't care about your spiritual purity. They just want the blood, the warmth, the chaos of your trembling toes. And what do? You start the chant. A monotonous, nasal drone that sounds like a goose with a sore throat. Psalms, psalms, and more psalms. As if reciting biblical poetry could somehow make the cold go away or the relentless boredom less soul-crushing. But it doesn't. It just muffles the screams of sleep, the dreams of a warm bed, The dreams of not feeling like you've been stuffed into a burlap sack and left to rot in a dank cellar. Your voice, it echoes off the ancient stone, bouncing back like the rebuke of an angry god. Your lips crack and bleed, not from divine punishment, but from dehydration and a diet of crusty bread and bitter herbs. Small talk? Nope. You're not allowed to breathe too deeply, lest you disturb the sacred silence of your own misery. You're a peasant. You're a peasant. You're a peasant. Repeat that in your head until it becomes your only thought, your mantra, your prison sentence. And the worst? The absolute zenith of medieval toileting is a humiliation ritual. Because in the Middle Ages, going to the bathroom isn't just a bodily function. It's a test of endurance, a humiliating public ordeal. No toilet paper? Never heard of it. Instead, you have a chamber potan earthenware vessel that's more of a medieval mystery ingredient than a hygiene product. You trudge with a heavy heart and an even heavier chamber pot, often in the dead of night, trying not to wake the entire monastery with your noisy, awkward shuffle. Because of course, privacy is a myth. The walls are thin as parchment, and everyone's listening. Everyone's waiting probably for their turn to complain about the smell or the noise or the fact that you're just not doing it right. Toileting in the Middle Ages isn't just a bodily necessity. It's a ritual of humiliation and endurance. A test of your patience, your dignity, and your ability to suppress the gag reflex when faced with a hot swamp of mystery ingredients, be it excrement or the damp, moldy straw you're forced to sit on. And heaven forbid you have diarrhea. That's a whole other level of medieval torturean, uncontrollable flood of shame, pain, and unspeakable smells that could knock out a herd of cattle. And gender? Oh, that's a whole other circus. Women? They're not just peeing in the dark. They're doing it with a social stigma thicker than mud. Because women in monasteries are often viewed like delicate porcelain dolls, fragile, precious, and in dire need of constant supervision. Their toileting? A secret ritual conducted behind closed doors if doors exist. If not, well, you just squat behind a bush like some wild animal, hoping no one sees the grimace or the inevitable splashback. Meanwhile, the men? They're busy pretending they're holier, holding their chamber pots with a sense of divine purpose, as if this act of bodily release is some sacred rite. Because in medieval monastic life, everything is a performance. Even the act of urinating, especially the act of defecating. It's all intertwined with the church's obsession with control, sin, and purity. Flavor comes from onions, salt, and pain. And apparently, so does your bathroom routine. But here's the punchline. Medieval toileting is a humiliation ritual, an initiation into suffering, an endurance test designed not just to cleanse the bowels, but to remind you of your own insignificance. To remind you that, in the grand scheme of things, you're just a tiny speck of flesh, bound by rules, chained to routines, and forever at the mercy of a God who probably laughs at your plight. Because whether you're a farmer or a baron, whether you wear silk or sackcloth, you're all equally helpless before the great, unyielding throne of medieval hygiene. And when the first light of dawn finally filters through the narrow slit of your cell, you're left drained body, mind, and dignity. Your toes are still numb, your voice hoarse, your soul slightly more crushed than before. And the cycle begins again. Wake, chant, shiver, squat, curse, repeat. The medieval monk's life isn't just about prayer. It's about enduring a relentless, bodily, spiritual boot camp where the only thing more brutal than the sermons is the simple act of going to the bathroom. So, there you are living the monastic dream, cloaked in robes that smell like a cross between wet sheep and last week's bread. And what's lurking just outside the monastery walls? Oh, just a hot swamp of mystery ingredients called the Black Death, the Middle Ages' own tinder for fleas and death. Imagine the scene. You're kneeling in prayer, your soul yearning for salvation, while a tiny, blood-sucking hitchhiker is busy orchestrating a symphony of pestilence right on your scrawny little armpit. Disease, death, fun group activity? Absolutely. Welcome to the plague next door, where the air is thick with the aroma of decay and the smell of your own impending doom. It's a grand party, really a grotesque potluck, where the main course is misery, served up with a side of paranoia. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, so are the fleas. The fleas are having the time of their tiny lives, bouncing from rat to human, spreading bubonic joy or misery depending on your perspective. And because medieval hygiene, let's be honest, an absolute joke, you're basically a walking, coughing, sweating petri dish. No soap, no hand sanitizer, no masks, just a lifetime supply of dirt, sweat, and the occasional unintentional exposure to a festering wound that looks like a bad watercolor. Your skin looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt, pale, mottled, and suspiciously pockmarked. And the plague isn't picky. It's not like it waits for a formal invitation or a clean room. No, it barges in like an uninvited guest at a feast, bringing chaos, death, and a vibe that screams, "You're next." You could be a peasant, a bishop, a wandering minstrel, doesn't matter. The Black Death's motto, "Everyone's welcome." It spreads with the subtlety of a drunken elephant, hitching rides on fleas, rats, and sickly travelers who probably should have stayed home, but hey, who has time for quarantine? Certainly not the medieval mind, which thought that a good dose of prayer and some questionable herbal concoctions could stave off the inevitable. Spoiler, they couldn't. Speaking of herbal concoctions, let's talk about medieval medicinian elaborate dance of superstition, desperation, and the occasional accidental miracle. The local healer would whip up a potion of wormwood, garlic, and something vaguely resembling hope, then charge you a small fortune for the privilege of possibly dying faster. The cures ranged from bleeding, because obviously blood loss is the answer to everything, to applying leeches that looked like tiny vampiric wristwatchers. All the while, the plague raged on, unfazed by your herbal tea or your fervent prayers. Because really, what's more effective at curing a deadly disease than a prayer? Well, perhaps a quarantine. But those were about as common as a unicorn in the village square. And let's not forget the social chaos. The plague didn't just kill bodies, it decimated minds and social order. The streets filled with the frantic, the terrified, and the utterly indifferent, because once you've seen enough friends and neighbors turn into rotting mounds, what's a little more decay? People started believing the end was nigh, and why not? The smell of death was thick enough to choke a knight on horseback. Towns turned into ghost towns faster than you can say mass hysteria, with entire populations fleeing, only to cower in caves or under beds, praying to anyone who'd listen. The monasteries, not immune. Monks, those supposed spiritual guides, became frantic too, their prayers muffled by the constant drone of death tolls and the scratching of rats behind the walls. And the worst part? The plague was just the opening act. Once it arrived, it left behind a trail of chaos-economic collapse, social upheaval, and a collective sense that the universe was playing a sick game of how much misery can we pack into a single lifetime. So whether you were a peasant, a noble, or a monk, life was a constant battle against the unseen, the unspeakable, and the utterly unstoppable. Disease, death, and other fun group activities, because in the Middle Ages, the only thing more contagious than the plague was despair itself. And you'd better believe that plague rats weren't the only ones spreading something foul. Fear, superstition, and the slow, relentless march toward oblivion had their own epidemic status. Welcome to the medieval health spa where the only thing guaranteed? You'll leave in a worse state than you arrived, and the house doesn't give refunds. Authority. The divine right of the abbot to boss around everyone even when he's clearly making it up as he goes along. Think of the abbot as the medieval version of that overly enthusiastic manager who's never quite sure what they're doing but insists on reminding you anyway. Power trips? Oh, they're practically an annual festival. Abbot so-and-so, the self-proclaimed voice of God, decides that his word is the ultimate law, no debate, no dissent, no questions asked. Because in the medieval monastery, questions are like fleas best squashed before they breed. And what's the first order of business? Rules. Rules thicker than porridge, because that's what you're eating for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, meticulously inscribed in rule books that look like they were handwritten by a drunk scribe on a bender. These books are the holy scriptures of bureaucracy, packed with regulations so obscure they make the modern DMV look like a casual suggestion. Need to go to the bathroom? Well, there's a rule for that. Want to eat? Follow the sacred dietary commandments. Want to breathe? Better check if the abbots authorized your inhalation quota. Speaking of toileting, medieval toileting is a humiliation ritualist, a matter of hygiene, more an elaborate dance of shame and survival. No toilet paper? Never heard of it. Instead, you get a cold, damp sponge on a stick or worse, a handful of moss if you're lucky. If you're a monk, you're expected to perform your ablutions in front of everyone, because privacy is a concept as alien as the moon. The closest you get to privacy is a tiny, unventilated closet called a latrine, which doubles as a social hub for gossip, sneers, and the occasional scuffle over who gets to sit where. Imagine the smell and intoxicating mixture of unwashed bodies, fermented cheese, and the collective despair of 1,000 souls. Fun with authority? The abbot might as well have installed a throne in the latrine, because he's the ruler of that stinky kingdom too. And then there's the joy of obedience, the sweet, sweet nectar of submission. You don't just obey because it's polite. You obey because disobedience is a sin, a crime, and a personal affront to the divine hierarchy. So whether you're a peasant or a bishop, you march to the abbot's drum, even when the beat makes no sense. You're a peasant. You're a peasant. You're a peasant. Like a broken record stuck on, "Yes, sir," "No, sir," and "Thank you, sir," even when the abbot's orders make about as much sense as a pig in a ballet class. The abbot's power trips are legendary. One day he's declaring fasting days that last so long they become a form of medieval torture, and the next he's punishing a monk for sneezing without permission. The penalty? Public shaming, extra chores, or worse, being forced to wear a dunce cap made of old scrolls. Because nothing says respect authority like a hat that screams, "I have no idea what I'm doing." His word is law, even when it's based on a dream, a whim, or a random verse pulled from a prayer book that's been read so many times, it's practically a prayer to chaos. And let's not forget the rule books, those sacred texts that detail everything from how to properly chew your bread, crush it into dust first, to how many steps you must take before kneeling in prayer. They're thicker than the monastery's walls, filled with footnotes, clarifications, and divine commandments that change with the wind or the abbot's mood. Break a rule? Prepare for a punishment that ranges from a gentle reminder to a public flogging, because nothing says spiritual growth like a lash across the back. Obedience isn't just about following rules. It's about submitting your will to the whims of men who believe they're channeling divine authority. You're a peasant. You're a peasant. You're a peasant. Because in the monastery, hierarchy is a sacred ladder, and everyone below the abbot is just a rung waiting to be kicked or pushed up or down. The joy, the chaos, the absurdity, it's all part of the grand, designed to keep you in your place, to remind you that your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt, and your only hope for salvation is to accept that you're a tiny cog in a vast, stinking machine of power. So whether you're a novice, a seasoned monk, or the abbot himself, you're caught in this relentless game of obedience and endless loop of do as I say, because I said so, and if you don't, eternal damnation awaits. The good news, you're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas, and they're probably laughing at your expense. Imagine a library, but not the cozy, leather-bound sanctuary of knowledge you envision today. No, this is the medieval monk's library of Wea, labyrinthine hellscape of parchment and ink, where the only thing more painstaking than the illumination is the slow, creeping madness that comes from staring at the same scrolls for decades. Because, let's face it, being a medieval monk wasn't exactly a Netflix binge. It was a relentless grind of ink-stained despair, a slow descent into a paper-piled abyss of illuminated manuscripts and mental exhaustion. First, the materials. You think your office supplies are bad? Try working with a hot swamp of mystery ingredients called parchment made from animal skins. No less each sheet as fragile as your patience. You're a peasant. You're a peasant. You're a peasant. And now you're expected to turn that hide into a delicate, shimmering canvas fit for saints and scholars alike. The process? Gut-wrenching. Soaking, liming, scraping, stretching each step a grotesque dance with a dead cow's hide that smells like a medieval butcher's wet dream. And if you think the animal cruelty stops there, think again. Ink? Oh, just a lovely concoction of soot, lead, and various poisonous chemicals dangerous enough to turn your fingertips blacker than your mood. Your task? To turn this pile of smelly, fragile animal skin into a masterpiece of spiritual enlightenment, which sounds noble until you realize the real goal is to produce enough pages to fill the endless corridors of monastic boredom. Because illumination isn't just about pretty pictures, oh no. It's about painstakingly copying every letter, every line, every ornate initial by hand. No spell check, no delete key, no sir. If you mess up, you start all over an act of pure, unadulterated torture. That's right, the monks, those supposed scholars, were essentially medieval copy-paste artists, doomed to repeat the same psalms and prayers until their eyes bled and their brain dissolved into ink-stained mush. And what about the illumination? Ah, the glorious, luminous embellishments. Gold leaf so thin it drifts like fairy dust, except it's more like fairy dust sprinkled over a pile of misery. Applying gold leaf was a ritual of patience, precision, and sheer masochism. You'd lay down the glue called gesso, then carefully, painstakingly, place the shimmering gold using a burin, a tiny tool that looks like a medieval nail file. One slip, one misaligned speck of gold, and you're back to square one, cursing your ancestors and the entire concept of artistry. The result? Pages that look like they were painted by saints and madmen alike, bright, gaudy, and stiff as a corpse. This wasn't art. It was a medieval form of torture, a vanity project for monks with little else to do but scroll, scribble, and glow like a Christmas tree. Speaking of glow, the illumination process must have felt like summoning demons from the depths of boredom. The monks would spend hours, days, weeks, layering colors, blending pigments, and meticulously outlining every leaf, face, and fanciful creature. Their smiles looked like something pulled from a haunted crypt, eyes glazed over with the dull ache of repetitive labor. And the colors, made from crushed minerals, plants, and sometimes even insect cochineal, for instance, was a tiny bug that turned everything into a bright, blood-red nightmare. Flavor comes from onions, salt, and pain, except here, it's pigments, poison, and tears. Now, you might think, well, at least they had inspiration, spiritual enlightenment, the divine muse. Ha! If by divine muse you mean an unending cycle of monotony, then yes, these monks were essentially stuck in a perpetual Groundhog Day, copying the same Latin prayers, copying the same saints, copying the same scrolls. Because in the Middle Ages, originality was a sin. Your job was to faithfully reproduce, not innovate. Imagine the mental gymnast screaming internally, is this really necessary? Can't I just write amen and call it a day? Nope, because to the medieval mind, every letter etched onto parchment was a spiritual act, a holy act, a soul-saving act. And your soul? It's melting faster than the wax seals sealing these cursed manuscripts. And let's not forget the sheer physical toll, the posture, the cramped hands, the eye strain from squinting at tiny, faded glyphs that seem to mock your efforts. Small talk, but try not to breathe too deeply. Your fellow monks might mistake your sigh of exasperation for a prayer. This isn't just writing, it's a form of penance, a medieval toileting ritual of humiliation. Because, believe it or not, monks had to deal with the same bodily functions as everyone else except in this universe. Toilet paper? Never heard of it. Instead, you had to wipe with a rag, your fingers, or if you were lucky, a handful of moss, and you thought your office bathroom was rough. In the end, the library of woe isn't just about the pages or the paint, it's about the slow, soul-crushing ritual of creation, the endless cycle of suffering that turned these illuminated manuscripts into floating prisons of ink. A monument to human patience, yes, but also a testament to the kind of madness that only centuries of monotony can brew. Because if you think being a medieval monk was about enlightenment, think again. It was about enduring a hot swamp of mystery ingredients, painstaking labor, and enough boredom to make even the most dedicated scribe question the very nature of existence. And somewhere in that dark, ink-stained abyss, the real horror was knowing that the work was never done. Ah, the social scene among medieval monks. Imagine a bubble of silence, punctuated by whispered gossip, awkward small talk, and the occasional heresy trial because nothing says party like risking eternal damnation for a few juicy tidbits about the abbot's new haircut. So whether you're a novice or a seasoned brother, your social life is less about hanging out at the tavern and more about navigating a minefield of ecclesiastical intrigue, secret alliances, and theological showdowns. Welcome to the cloister's version of high school, but with more incense and less understanding of your own feelings. First, let's talk about small talk, because in the monastery, how's the weather? Isn't just a pleasantry, it's a calculated move. The weather, after all, is a miracle of divine will, which means your casual comment about the rain turning the cloister's yard into a muddy soup is really an indirect way of asking if the abbot's mood will be as stormy as the sky. Small talk here is less about genuine connection and more about strategic positioning. You nod at Brother Thomas, whose smile looks like it's been carved out of wax, and you ask about his health, though what you really mean is, are you plotting against me, or are you just the usual passive-aggressive mess? Because in the closed world of monks, everyone's got an agenda, and the weather is just the small-talk version of diplomacy, carefully measured, heavily coded, and liable to turn into a full-blown theological argument if you're not careful. Gossip. Oh, it's the monastery's secret currency. It's the currency you trade during long, dull hours of manual labor. Think endless hours of copying scripture or tending the herb garden, when the only thing to keep your mind from wandering into heretical territory is the sweet, sweet thrill of scandal. Who's secretly praying to a saint other than the one they're supposed to? Who's been caught sneaking a sip of wine during Compline? Who's secretly questioning the divine right of the abbot? It's all whispered behind closed doors, hushed as if the very walls might betray you, because they will. Walls have ears, and ears have mouths, and mouths carry secrets that can land you in a heresy trial faster than you can say apostasy. Gossips here are part informant, part conspiracy theorist, part spiritual detectives sniffing out heresy like bloodhounds, but with less sense of decency and more of a twisted delight in chaos. And speaking of heresio, the fun never stops. Because in the medieval monastery, heresy isn't just a theological mistake, it's a social contagion, a virus that can ruin reputations, tear apart the fragile fabric of monastic unity, and send you straight to the fire of damnation. Heresy trials are the monastery's equivalent of a medieval reality television show, except instead of cash prizes, you get excommunication, eternal damnation, and maybe a nice torching if they're feeling particularly dramatic. The suspect? You. The evidence? A misplaced comment about the nature of Christ, a suspiciously modern question about the universe, or a smirk that looks a little too worldly. The inquisitors, those pompous, self-righteous clerics there like medieval FBI agents, interrogating, accusing, and twisting every innocent remark into proof of heresy. They love to play good cop, bad cop, although in this case, all cops are bad, and the bad is eternal punishment. The accused, usually a hapless brother who, in a moment of weakness, dared to suggest that maybe the universe isn't entirely God's fault, gasp, or that the church's teachings are a little too rigid. The trial is a theatrical spectacle, with accusations flying faster than pigeons at a bread festival. Witnesses are summoned fellow monks with their own grudges and secrets, and everyone's trying to look innocent while secretly praying for divine mercy or the safety of their own necks. Confessions are extracted with the gentle charm of a medieval dentist wielding a rusty saw, and the verdict is often death by 1,000 theological cuts. Heretics are burned, excommunicated, or sentenced to a lifetime of silent penance, because nothing says social life like public shame and spiritual exile. Meanwhile, the social hierarchy in the cloister is as cutthroat as a rat fight in a grain silo. You've got your senior monks, the wise and revered, who wield their influence like medieval mafioso sexcept instead of guns. They brandish relics and scriptures. Then there are the novices, fresh-faced and eager, but often naive enough to get caught gossiping about the abbot's new haircut or worse, questioning the divine order. And everyone knows, the higher up you are, the more power you have to whisper behind everyone's back, to spread rumors, and to manipulate the fragile social fabric into your own favor. It's a game of ecclesiastical chess, where the pawns are innocent and the bishops are always 2 steps ahead, plotting their next move in the shadowy corridors of spiritual authority. So whether you're exchanging polite, soul-sucking pleasantries, whispering secrets with a smirk, or plotting your heretical escape, the social life of a medieval monk is a tangled web of intrigue, gossip, and the occasional heresy trial. It's a slow-burning soap opera, set against a backdrop of divine punishment and eternal damnation, where everyone's pretending to be pious while secretly dreaming of freedom or at least a decent bed and a bath. But no. Toilets? Never heard of them. The monastery's version of social interaction is a humiliating ritual, a subtle game of power, suspicion, and the constant fear that your next whispered word might condemn you to the flames. Because in the cloister, the only thing more dangerous than heresy is getting caught gossiping about heresy. So, you've got a runaway fantasy bubbling in your brain, an escape plan as subtle as a bull in a china shop. You imagine slipping out of the cloister, disappearing into the foggy woods, and living a life of freedom, adventure, and perhaps a little less filth. But hold on to your sandal, because medieval monks? They had the escape plan of a drunkard trying to tiptoe past a sleeping bear. Spoiler alert. It's a disaster waiting to happen, and you'll wish you'd never tried. First, let's talk about the grand master plan. Sneaking out in the dead of night, cloaked in darkness, the shadows your ally, the stars your silent witnesses. You picture it, your robes billowing like a hero's cape, the thrill of freedom pulsing through your veins. But in reality, your every step echoes like a church bell in a library. The monastery's walls are more like medieval Fort Knox thick, oppressive, and sprinkled with guards whose job is to prevent you from becoming a fugitive of faith. And these guards? They're not just bored monks, oh no, they're armed with torches, pitchforks, and a keen sense that you're about as subtle as a fart in a cathedral. Now, the actual escape? It's a masterclass in futility. You crawl, you sneak, you tiptoe past the sleeping abbot who's snoring like a dying boar, except he's not really asleep. No, he's pretending. Because monks, they have a sixth sense for trouble. They know when someone's sneaking out. It's like they've got built-in radar, probably because they're bored out of their minds. So they spend half their days working on their superior perception. You get to the wall, maybe with a shaky rope or a stolen key, because, obviously, the monastery keeps its secrets locked up tighter than a dragon's treasure end. What happens? You get caught, or worse, discovered. Because monks, they're not just petty jailers. They're borderline conspiracy theorists, convinced everyone's out to steal their sacred relics or run off with the sacred cow. And here's where the fun really kicks in: the chase. The monks, they're like a pack of hounds on a fox's tail, except the fox is you, and the hounds are armed with more patience than a saint and less mercy than a starving wolf. The chase through the woods? It's a slapstick spectacle, your breath fogging the cold night air, your heartbeat pounding like a drum solo, your legs flailing like a toddler's except you're trying to look sneaky. Spoiler: you look ridiculous. You trip over roots, you stumble into brambles, and the moonlight reveals your sweaty, panicked face, probably looking like something pulled from a haunted crypt. And let's not forget the inevitable capture. Because surprise, you're not Houdini. You're a peasant with a bad plan. The monks, they're relentless. They grab you, throw you back into the monastery like a misbehaving puppy. And what's the punishment? Hard labor, extra prayers, and the gentle reminder that your soul isn't quite ready for the real world. They don't care if you're just trying to see if life outside the stone walls is better. No, they're more interested in keeping you focused, which in medieval terms means chained to your misery with a smile that looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt. So, you're a failure at escape, huh? That's the worst part, because in your head, you're a hero. You see yourself scaling walls, dodging guards, whispering promises of freedom, but in reality, you're a sitting duck, caught faster than a rat in a trap, your fantasies crushed under the weight of medieval surveillance, snobbery, and a dash of divine punishment. And once you're back inside, you're stuck with the same dull routine, the same endless prayers, the same humiliations, only now, with a streak of shame and the knowledge that your daring escape was basically a medieval version of a bad joke. Because let's be honest, no sunblock, no hat, unless you fashioned one out of straw like a desperate scarecrow. No snacks, no GPS, no discreet getaway vehicle, just you, a rough cloak, and a plan that's about as reliable as a wooden wheel on a rocky road. The walls? They're more like a prison with a view of the countryside, except the view's mostly mud, and more mud. And the only thing you're escaping besides the monotonous, a hot swamp of mystery ingredients called medieval toileting, which is a humiliation ritual that makes modern bathroom breaks look like spa days. And speaking of toilets, you think medieval monks had some fancy plumbing system? Nope. Toilets? Never heard of it. Instead, you're left with a bucket or a hole in the ground. Or if you're lucky, a communal cesspit that's the equivalent of a toxic swamp, teeming with flies, fleas, and a smell so vile it could be bottled and sold as medieval air freshener. Small talk, but try not to breathe too deeply. Your options? Hold your nose, or get real cozy with the smell of rotting vegetables, human waste, and the faint scent of despair. So whether you're a peasant dreaming of freedom or a monk fantasizing about a day off from eternal prayer, the lesson is clear. Escape isn't just hard, it's a fool's errand wrapped in a shackle of reality. You want to run away? Go ahead, but don't say you weren't warned. Because in the end, medieval toileting is a humiliation ritual. Your escape is a comedy of errors, and the only real reward, the cruel, bitter knowledge that you tried and failed spectacularly. Oh, and that you're still stuck, right where you started inside the walls of a medieval nightmare, wishing you'd never tried to run in the first place. Why did they do it? Why did these miserable souls voluntarily sign up for the most soul-crushing, dignity-shattering gig in medieval society? Because fear, faith, and the sweet, intoxicating embrace of routine misery had a gravitational pull so strong even the most stubborn peasant couldn't resist. Fear, the original social lubricant, the ancient fuel that kept the church and the throne cozy tight as a nun's habit while everyone else suffered. You're a peasant, you're a peasant, you're a peasant. The bad harvest, the plague, the bishop's wrath, no matter what, it's not your fault. Blame the devil, blame sin, blame the weather gods that hate you personally. And if you're a monk, fear is doubled, tripled. Not only do you have to worry about eternal damnation like everyone else, but also about messing up your vows forget chastity. Hell, the devil's got a special room waiting. So whether you're a peasant or a monk, fear is the sticky glue that holds the medieval mental prison door shut. But faith? Oh, faith. The medieval version of a cosmic lottery ticket, only it's rigged so heavily in favor of eternal reward that even the most miserable existence becomes a divine privilege. You're a peasant, you're a peasant, you're a peasant. You wake up every day knowing that if you toil like a beast, pray like a saint, and suffer in silence, preferably with a smile that looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt, your soul will eventually ascend to a celestial mansion, or at least avoid the fiery pits of hell. Because in medieval mindscape, doubt was a dangerous enemy, more dangerous than the fleas, more dangerous than starvation. Faith was your armor, your shield, your excuse to accept the unthinkable, that being constantly cold, hungry, and humiliated is somehow holy. It's like a divine conspiracy, really. You're told that suffering is a virtue, that pain purifies, that your tears are holy water, and the believers, they lap it up like a dog with a new bone, so much so that questioning becomes heresy, and heresy gets you branded a witch or worse. Meanwhile, routine becomes your best friender, your worst enemy dressed as a friend, because whether you're kneeling in prayer or shoveling manure, every day is a rerun of the last same low-grade misery, different hour. Monks, their routine was a symphony of monotonous chanting psalms until the throat bled, copying manuscripts until the eyes blurred into a mosaic of ink smudges, fasting until the stomach was a hollow drum of despair. But they did it anyway. Why? Because routine was the only thing that kept the chaos at bay on ironclad schedule that rendered life predictable, even if predictability meant endless suffering. You get up, you pray, you work, you eat, you sleep, repeat. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. The routine is a brutal, unending treadmill where the only thing more exhausting than the work is the knowledge that it's never going to end. And yet, you do it. Not because you're brave, not because you're especially religious. Because despair is a terrible thing to waste, and routine is the best way to numb the soul. Toilet paper? Never heard of it. Instead, medieval toileting is a humiliation ritual that would make a modern bathroom break look like a spa day. No porcelain throne, no flush, no privacy. Just a hole in the ground, more like a portal to chaos surrounded by a community of equally desperate souls. You squat over a cesspool of mystery ingredients, a hot swamp of filth and disease, praying silently that you don't slip or fall in. And if you do, well then it's a soggy, miserable dunk in your own personal hell. Because cleanliness isn't a medieval concern, survival is. Your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt, because what else can you do when your daily bathroom ritual involves peril, dirt, and the constant threat of disease? It's a humiliating ritual. A daily reminder that your dignity is a fragile, fleeting thing eaten away by fleas, filth, and the unrelenting passage of time. And then there's gender. Oh, the glorious medieval gender hierarchy, a twisted pyramid where men are gods and women are, well, barely tolerated, often seen as vessels of sin or temptation. Women, they're the prize, the temptation, the reason for all the suffering. So whether you're a peasant girl or a noble lady, the message is clear. Your primary purpose is to serve, to suffer, to produce heirs, and to do so with a smile that looks like it's been scraped from a tombstone. No sunblock, no hat, unless you fashioned one out of straw like a desperate scarecrow. And if you dare step out of line, the church's idea of justice is a hot iron, a pillory, or worse, public shaming. Because in medieval society, the goal was to keep everyone in line, no matter how brutal the punishment. Women's work, cooking, cleaning, birthing, and enduring a lifetime of societal scornal under the watchful eyes of a male-dominated cosmos that sees women as either saints or sinners, but never as equals. It's a system built on fear, reinforced by faith, and maintained through routine misery. So whether you're a monk, a peasant, or a noble, the message is clear. Life in medieval times was a never-ending series of humiliations, fears, and raudini's sake, one carefully designed to keep you compliant, broken, and just barely hanging on. The divine joke? Most of them knew the punchline. They just couldn't do anything about it. Because in the medieval universe, the only thing more terrifying than the suffering itself was the idea of questioning it. And questioning, that was heresy. So whether you were kneeling in prayer or squatting over a hole in the ground, the core truth remained: life sucked. But hey, at least you had faith that it was all for a higher purpose. And that, in the end, was the most twisted comfort of all. So, you think being a modern monk sounds like a nice little retreat from chaos? Think again, because, spoiler alert, the modern monk isn't some Zen master sipping matcha in a bamboo grove. No. It's more like a spiritual boot camp with less caffeine and more existential dread. And the best part? You're probably going to learn exactly why the medieval monks had it worse only now, with Wi-Fi and a latte. So buckle up, because what we can learn from these contemplative warriors of the cloister might make you grateful, really grateful, that you're not trying to survive a 12th century monastery without a prayer book, a prayer, or even a clue. First, let's talk about solitude. Modern monks often seek it out, cloistered away in retreat centers or monastic apartments, trying to find peace and silence. But let's be honest, the silence of a medieval cell was less about enlightenment and more about being trapped inside a stone coffin with your own thoughts plus a generous helping of rats, dampness, and the ever-present stink of unwashed linen. Today's monks, they get Wi-Fi, they get podcasts, they get Netflix marathons that last longer than their entire medieval careers. Their biggest problem? Deciding whether to meditate or scroll through Instagram. Medieval monks? Their inner peace was interrupted by the loud, unrelenting chorus of their own bodily functions, the incessant squeals of mice, and the grim realization that their only source of light was a flickering candle that could blow out at any moment, leaving them to contemplate eternity in pitch darkness, probably praying that the rat gnawing their foot would go find a snack elsewhere. And speaking of bodily functions, because what's a medieval monk story without a little grossness? Toileting in the Middle Ages? An epic saga of humiliation, ritual, and sheer terror. No porcelain throne, no flushing system, no privacy. Just a hole in the ground, often shared with the rats, fleas, and whatever else lurked in the shadows. Imagine squatting over a hole in the dirt, trying not to fall in, or worse, getting caught by the abbot because you weren't quick enough. Medieval toileting is a humiliation ritual. a test of patience, a spiritual journey into the depths of disgust. Modern monks? They have, at worst, a discreet bathroom break, with toilet paper, never heard of it, hand soap, and maybe some scented candles, because cleanliness, after all, is next to godliness. Right? Wrong? Medieval monks? They'd probably trade all their relics just for a decent flush and soap that doesn't make their hands look like they've been dipped in ink. But no soap was a luxury. And their bathroom? A hot swamp of mystery ingredients that could turn their skin into a flaky, itchy hellscape. Then there's the matter of sustenance. Medieval monks ate like they were preparing for a famine that never ended. Flavor? It came from onions, salt, and pain. Their diet was a grim parade of porridge, bread, and whatever vegetables they could cultivate, mostly bitter, mostly bland, mostly a reminder that you're alive only because you've survived another day of hunger and boredom. Modern monks? They get quinoa, smoothies, and the occasional organic kale. Their biggest challenge? Not choking on a gluten-free cracker while contemplating the meaning of life. Medieval monks, meanwhile, chewed on whatever was left after the rats and bugs had their fill, often wondering if the next meal would be better or if they'd die of starvation, first probably the latter, because medieval fasting was a spiritual torture, a hunger pilgrimage that would make a modern juice cleanse look like a picnic. Gender? Ha! Medieval monks were mostly men because women, according to the church, were too emotional, too unpredictable, too everything. And so they were locked out of the contemplative club, left to watch the monks' version of enlightenment from behind iron bars of misogyny. Modern monks? They're more inclusive, but that doesn't mean they're free from absurdity. Some still wrestle with outdated notions of gender roles, cloaked in robes and vows, while secretly questioning whether the universe really cares if they're a man, a woman, or something entirely outside the binary. But at least they're not expected to wear a hood and pretend that a woman's spiritual journey is less valid, something medieval monks had no qualms about enforcing, often with a hefty dose of shame and a pinch of heresy suspicion. And let's not forget the spiritual grinda, relentless, soul-warping marathon of prayers, psalms, and sermons that would make a modern-day mindfulness retreat seem like a walk in the park. Medieval monks weren't just praying. They were performing a daily ritual of survival, a spiritual endurance test where each psalm was a brick in their emotional prison. Modern monks? They're still doing the prayer thing, sure, but they've got apps, guided meditations, and a much-needed safety net of mental health awareness. The medieval version? Their mental health was pretty much a myth, something only whispered about in the dark corners of the cloister, where the monks silently wondered if they'd lost their mind or if the voices in the walls were just their own guilt manifesting. So, what can we learn? Well, maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Because the modern monk's life, with its Wi-Fi, yoga mats, and avocado toast, is a sanitized version of medieval suffering, only with less desperation and more self-indulgence. The medieval monk? A hero of endurance, yes. A saint? Often. But also a victim of a brutal, unrelenting, and utterly disgusting life. The lesson? Be grateful. Be very grateful. Because trying to emulate a medieval monk today is like signing up for a spiritual torture chamber, except the torture is more subtle and the discomfort is wrapped in a blanket of privilege. So whether you're a farmer or a baron, a tech whiz or a TikTok star, you can thank your lucky stars that you don't have to survive a day in their dusty, grimy sandals. Or, better yet, don't even try. Because, trust us, the only thing modern monks have to worry about besides their Wi-Fi going out is whether they'll remember to meditate or just scroll mindlessly for hours. And that, my friend, is a luxury medieval monks could only dream of. Welcome to rock bottom, my friend. So, you've been sold into slavery again. Yes, again. Because in the medieval universe, the concept of personal sovereignty is about as real as unicorns and fairies, and probably just as likely. One minute you're minding your business, whether that's plowing a field, praying for rain, or trying to keep your smile from looking like something pulled from a haunted cryptand, the next, you're a glorified piece of property. Sold, traded, bartered, pawned, your life reduced to a commodity with less dignity than a used horseshoe. Imagine this. You're a peasant. You're a peasant. You're a peasant. The same dusty, dirt-stained peasant, day after day, until the day someone with a shiny coin or a crooked smile comes along and decides your fate. No consent, no negotiations, no, "Hey, I'd like to stay free, thanks." Just a swift, brutal transaction, like buying a rotten apple from a market stall, except instead of apples, it's your very existence. And the buyer could be a lord, a monastery, or some wandering band of bandits with a penchant for kidnapping. The thing about medieval slavery, because, yes, it's slavery, but with a medieval twist is that it's not always the obvious, you're in chains kind. Oh no. Sometimes it's just a swap of identities, a little, "You're working for me now," handshake, but with a sword on your neck. You're a peasant, you're a peasant, you're a peasant. And suddenly, you're hauling firewood for someone else's hearth. Or worse, hauling it for someone who thinks they own the very ground you walk on. Because whether you're a farmer or a baron, the hierarchy is a giant, greasy, medieval stew full of swill, and you're just the soggy bread soaking it all up. And let's talk about the fun part, transportation. Because in medieval slavery, it's not just about being sold, it's about getting there. Sometimes that means being dragged behind a cart, chained to other unfortunate souls, bouncing over cobblestones sharper than your mother-in-law's tongue. Or maybe you're packed into the hull of a ship. Imagine the glorious aroma of human sweat, fish guts, and the unidentifiable mystery ingredients that make up medieval seawater. No sunblock, no hat, unless you fashioned one out of straw like a desperate scarecrow. The journey is a test of endurance, a brutal parade of sweat, tears, and the occasional rat nibbling on your toes, if rats still nibble toes, which they probably did. Once you arrive, get ready for the real fun. Because medieval slavery isn't just about physical labor. It's about psychological torment wrapped in a burlap sack of humiliation. You're expected to accept your new status with a smile that looks like it's been pulled from a haunted crypt if you're lucky enough to be allowed a smile at all. The master's whip? That's just a bonus feature in the medieval misery package. You're a human resource, a tool, a broken cog in the vast, grinding machine of feudal exploitation. And let's not forget the specialty of medieval slavery, its complete and utter lack of safety nets or rights. You're not even guaranteed a decent meal. Flavor comes from onions, salt, and pain in food is often a hot swamp of mystery ingredients that look suspiciously like yesterday's leftovers, rebranded as soup. And hygiene? Toileting in medieval times is a humiliation ritual. No toilet paper? Never heard of it. Instead, you get a ragged piece of cloth, or, if you're lucky, a pit latrine that's a festering monument to neglect. Small talk. But try not to breathe too deeply. Those pits smell like the collective soul of 1,000 despairing souls, fermented into a stench that clings to your nostrils forever. And what about gender? Oh, it's a whole other bag of grotesque. Women, especially, are just commodities with a side of reproductive duty. Rape? Oh, it's practically part of the job description. Because in medieval society, your value is measured in children, not consent, and the concept of choice is as mythical as the fountain of youth. Women are passed around like livestock at a market. Furniture. And if you're a woman, you're not just a peasant, you're a breeding machine, a commodity with a heartbeat and a smile that's more grimace than grin. And the crescendo? It's not a symphony, it's a cacophony of suffering. Medieval slavery is a never-ending crescendo of abuse, neglect, and dehumanization. Every day is a brutal reminder that your existence is worth less than the dirt under your feet, less than the stone walls trapping you, less than the fleas crawling over your skin, less than the rotting straw you sleep on. You're a piece of a larger, rotten, puzzling, unimportant, disposable scrap of flesh and bone. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas, and the rats, and the endless gnawing sense that your fate is sealed on eternal cycle of being sold, enslaved, and discarded like yesterday's trash. Medieval slavery isn't just a brutal system. It's a designed to break your spirit ritual, a grotesque carnival of suffering, where the only prize is survival, and the only audience is the indifferent, brutal universe that carved this hellscape into the world. So whether you're a peasant, a slave, or just some unlucky soul caught in the conveyor belt of medieval misery, one thing is clear: In this twisted, blood-soaked, dung-streaked version of history, your only real freedom is the fleeting hope that maybe, just maybe, it will end someday, or not. Because in medieval times, the only thing certain is the certainty of suffering. And that, my friend, is rock-bottom welcome to it. Breakfast in the medieval monastery. Think of it as the culinary equivalent of a prison cell painted with the vaguest hint of hope. Your first meal of the day? Gruel. Not just any gruel, mind you, but a steaming, porridge-like sludge that looks like it was scraped from the bottom of a swamp. It's the kind of food that whispers, "Why bother?" before you even swallow. Made from whatever grains the monks could wrestle away from the local farmer's barley, oats. Perhaps a dash of riotous mush is less nourishing and more a test of endurance. It's the breakfast of champions? Nope. It's the breakfast of the chronically bored, the perpetually hungry, and those who've resigned themselves to eternal blandness. And flavor? Flavor? Come on. Flavor comes from onions, salt, and pain. This stuff? Bland enough to make a modern health food look like a spice bazaar. The monks? They'd stir it with whatever was available, sometimes a handful of herbs, if they were feeling particularly rebellious, which was rare. Mostly, it was a hot swamp of mystery ingredients, mushrooms that might be poison, roots that looked suspicious, and a suspiciously consistent texture that suggested it was cooked in the tears of despair. It was the kind of meal that made you forget what taste even was. No salt, no sugar, no fig jam, no problem. Just a bowl of monotony served every morning because, in the Middle Ages, variety was considered a sign of sin. But wait, it gets better. Because after the gruel, you might get lucky if luck's a word that applies here by receiving a side of mystery meat. Ah, yes. The infamous medieval mitan, unidentifiable, often unrecognizable, possibly a live portion of an animal's carcass. Think of it as the culinary equivalent of Russian roulette. You could be gnawing on a piece of pig, or perhaps some ancient dried-up remains of a cow that's been hanging in the monastery's cellar for so long it has developed a personality of its own. No labels, no transparency, just a hot, greasy, unctuous slab that looks like it was dragged through the mud and then served with a side of, what are you, some kind of food critic? The texture? Chewy enough to give your jaw a workout. The flavor? Well, flavor comes from onions, salt, and pain. Add a splash of vinegar or a sprinkle of herbs if you're feeling daring, though. Daring in medieval kitchens often meant risking food poisoning or a sudden death by indigestion. And speaking of mystery, medieval cooks didn't exactly believe in transparency. Mystery meat was less an ingredient and more a culinary philosophy. Was it beef, pork, a strange amalgamation of leftovers? Who knows? The monks certainly didn't. They just chopped, boiled, and hoped for the best. The result was a hot mess, literally. A greasy, gelatinous nightmare that clung to your teeth like it was trying to escape. And you'd eat it because, well, starving's a good motivator. Plus, the idea of freshness was a concept as foreign as the idea of a balanced diet. Fresh meat? That was a luxury. Most of what passed as sustenance was days, sometimes weeks, old and repurposed into new forms of culinary torture. But let's not forget the pièce de résistance, the bread. Or what was left of it. Medieval bread was more like a brick with hole shard, dense, and capable of shattering your teeth if you weren't careful. It was made from coarse grains, ground on stones, kneaded with cold water, and baked in communal ovens that probably had more bacteria than the local pond. The bread's purpose? To soak up the mystery meat and gruel, turning every meal into a soggy, flavorless mess that you'd swallow with a grimace. No sunblock, no hat, unless you fashioned one out of straw like a desperate scarecrow because sun exposure was less about protecting your skin and more about punishing you for daring to breathe. And let's talk about the ritual of breakfast, because in the Middle Ages, eating was less about enjoyment and more about survival. So whether you're a peasant or a monk, your morning meal is a test of endurance, a reminder that you're alive, a fact that's almost miraculous given the quality of your sustenance. The monks? They'd sit in silence, scooping up the mush, eyes flicking towards the flickering candle flame that cast shadows on their grim faces. The peasants? They'd choke down whatever they could scavenge, often with a grimace that could curdle milk, small talk, but try not to breathe too deeply, because inhaling meant risking ingesting a bit of the mysterious airborne pathogens lurking in the monastery's drafty halls. And after breakfast, oh, the glorious aftermath, because medieval toileting is a humiliation ritual, a grotesque dance of necessity that's as far removed from modern hygiene as the moon is from the sun. No toilet paper? Never heard of it. Instead, you get a bucket, a chamber pot, or perhaps a stream of cold water if you're lucky enough to have access. No flush, no privacy, no dignity. Just a hurried shuffle, a grimace, and the hope that no one hears the splash, because in those days, privacy was a myth. The smell? A pungent testament to the fact that medieval hygiene was more about survival than comfort. And if you were a monk, well, you'd do your business in the communal latrine, which was basically a hole in the ground surrounded by a wooden shedand. Hope you didn't fall in or get splashed by the unfortunate soul who went before you. So whether you're gnawing on mystery meat, choking down the flavorless sludge, or squatting in a communal hole, breakfast in the Middle Ages was less a meal and more a ritual of endurance. A test of patience, of fortitude, of whether you could stomach the daily assault on your senses and dignity. Because in the medieval world, sustenance wasn't about taste, pleasure, or health. It was about survival bare, brutal, and often disgusting. And that's exactly what made it so utterly, unforgettably sucky. Toilet paper? Never heard of it. The unbearable lightness of Roman hygiene. Toilet paper? Never heard of it. That's the unspoken motto of medieval hygiene. And honestly, it's a miracle any of us survived long enough to complain about it. Imagine a world where your bathroom routine is less private moment of relief and more public spectacle of primal desperation. Medieval toilets, or the lack thereof, were less chic porcelain throne and more public pit of shame and mystery ingredients. You think modern plumbing is bad? Ha, that's the sanitized version. Medieval toileting was a humiliating ritual, an epic saga of filth, shame, and unresolved questions about what actually lurked in the dark depths of that muddy pit. First, let's talk about where everyone went. Peasants, monks, kings all alike. If you had to go, you found a hole in the ground, a bucket or a cesspit so foul that even the rats refused to linger. No flush, no running water. No, please wash your hands sign. Just you, your unmentionables, and a hot swamp of mystery ingredients, leftover food, animal droppings, human excrement, and the occasional unidentifiable smudge of something that looked like the aftermath of a dragon's tantrum. And you know what? There was no dignity involved. None. Just a frantic scramble to find some semblance of privacy. Good luck with that. Because privacy was a luxury for the wealthy, who still had to deal with chamber pots and the smell of desperation wafting through stone corridors. And oh, the chamber pot. It's like the medieval version of a bedside table, except instead of a sleek ceramic container, it's a lumpy earthenware disgrace that you'd rather forget existed. You'd carry it around like a toxic trophy, sometimes under your cloak, sometimes tucked into a corner of your chamber, all the while praying no one heard the muffled thud when you finally emptied it. Because dumping that foul liquid and solids into the street was a community event, like a messy parade of societal decay. Streets filled with a stew of human waste, animal carcasses, and the occasional unfortunate soul slipping on the slick, stinking mess. No wonder the Black Death found fertile ground in such filth. Bacteria, germs, nope. Just medieval hygiene in full grotesque display. And speaking of the street, imagine the glorious fresh air of medieval citizen, intoxicating blend of roasted meat, sewage, and unwashed body siege breath, a gamble. You could pepper your morning with the aromatic symphony of the marketplace, or you could seek refuge in the church, where at least the incense masked some of the more pungent realities. But even there, hygiene was a joke wrapped in ecclesiastical robes. Priests, monks, they all had their own secret hygiene routines, which mostly involved a splash of water and a hope that no one noticed the smell. Because, let's be real, medieval hygiene was less about cleanliness and more about survival from the overwhelming stench, the disease, the social shame of a dirty behind. Now, you might wonder, did anyone invent a better solution? Did they, by some stroke of genius, come up with a medieval version of toilet paper? Nope, not a whisper of it. Instead, They used whatever was at hand: cloth, rags, moss, hay, or even leaves if you were lucky. And here's the kicker. These weren't single-use. Oh no. They'd be rinsed in the nearest water source, which was probably just a muddy puddle of filth, and reused until they disintegrated into a soggy, stained mess. Imagine the layers of grime, the buildup of sweat, and the lingering scent of last week's cleaning session. And the worst? It was a gamble every time. Was that rag a little too stiff? Did it scratch? Did it carry disease? No one knew, but everyone pretended they didn't care. Small talk? Sure, but try not to breathe too deeply. Because in medieval hygiene, even your casual chat was a risk of inhaling foul fumes, catching some airborne plague, or just experiencing the full sensory assault of a society whose idea of clean was a distant, mythical concept. That's why, in the Middle Ages, personal hygiene was more about avoiding death by microbes than about smelling like a fresh meadow. Because, honestly, the only thing fresh about medieval hygiene was the hope that the plague wouldn't find you before your next bath. Oh wait, there were no baths, only the occasional ritual cleansing that involved a splash of water and a prayer. And speaking of baths, here's a fun fact. Medieval baths were more like elaborate rituals of humiliation than cleansing. You'd soak in a tub filled with hot water if you could afford it, and then be scrubbed down by a servant who probably had a worse hygiene record than you. Most common folk, they just rinsed their hands and faces, if at all. For them, cleanliness was a luxury reserved for the upper classes, who, let's face it, probably only looked clean because they had the best stench-masking perfumes, which, in medieval times, meant herbs, spices, or the stinky remnants of exotic oils. The rest of society, well, they just endured the smell, often with a resigned grimace and a prayer for mercy. So whether you're a peasant or a baron, the reality was the same. Medieval toileting was a humiliating ritual, a dirty, smelly dance with the unknown. No modern comfort, no privacy, no dignity. Just a brutal reminder that, in those days, hygiene was less about health and more about survival from the shame, the smell, the diseases lurking in every dark corner of the latrineless landscape. And let's be honest, the only thing medieval hygiene truly cleaned was the patience of those who had to live through it. Imagine strutting into a room, expecting a splash of admiration, maybe some envy to find your wardrobe looks like it was designed by a blind tailor with a penchant for sackcloth and despair. Welcome to the medieval monk's fashion disaster, where the only thing more pathetic than the threadbare robes is the complete lack of any sense of style, unless humility, drabness, and the art of looking like a washed-out scarecrow are your goals. Let's get one thing straight. The toga envy is real. The Roman senators, the Greek philosophers, those guys knew how to dress for success. They strutted around in flowing, colorful togas that whispered of power, privilege, and a faint scent of laurel leaves. Meanwhile, monks wore rough, unadorned, and truth be told, uniformly hideous habits. No silk, no velvet, no fancy embroidery. Just a sackcloth tunic that looked like it was spun from the hair of 1,000 miserable goats. And the worst part? They thought they looked holy. They thought they looked ascetic. They thought they looked spiritual. But really, they looked like they lost a bet with the wardrobe gods. The simple truth? In medieval times, your clothes were a badge of status, a billboard of your social standing, and a billboard of your fashion sense if anyone was paying attention, which no one was. So whether you're a peasant, a prince, or a monk, everyone's dressed in a uniform of misery, stitched together from what was left after the livestock had their fill. The peasant's tunic, threadbare, stained, and probably crawling with fleas because, let's face it, laundry was a luxury. The noble's robes, slightly better, but only because they had someone to wash and mend them. The monk's habit, oh, that's the pièce de résistance of medieval fashion failures, an unwashed, shapeless shroud that screams, I give up on style, but I'd rather look like a ghost than a sinner. And speaking of ghosts, monks' robes looked like they'd been borrowed from the undead. Your outfit, dear reader, is a kind of medieval cosplay for the spiritually committed, except the costume is made from fabric so coarse it could scrape the flesh off your bones. The dye? Forget vibrant hues. Medieval dyes were so rare and expensive they were reserved for kings. Your humble monk's habit was probably a dull, muddy gray or a sickly brown, or occasionally mottled with the mysterious stains of who knows what. The color palette was a masterclass in misery. No sunblock, no hat, unless you fashioned one out of straw like a desperate scarecrow. So whether you're trying to look devout or just desperately hoping no one notices your stained, threadbare attire, the end result is the same: a walking billboard for austerity and despair. And let's not forget the accessory sore, the glaring lack thereof. No flashy rings, no gold chains, no designer shoes, just a pair of rough sandals that look like they've been through a war and lost. You'd think monks would have at least tried some flair, maybe a fancy hood or a sash to jazz things up. Nope, the hood was a mandatory part of the uniform, draped like a shroud over your head, hiding your face from the world and possibly from any hope of fashion sense. It's like they were deliberately trying to look as unapproachable and as utterly unglamorous as possible. If you wanted to be stylish, being a monk was about as effective as trying to turn a pile of manure into a diamond. Now, one might argue that monks didn't care about style fine, but they still suffered from the universal medieval truth. No matter your rank, your wealth, or your piety, your wardrobe was a prison, a symbol of your utter lack of agency in the fashion department. Their robes didn't just look pathetic, they also felt like they'd been spun from despair and the leftover fibers of failed ambitions. Wearing this uniform of humility was supposed to show you'd sacrificed worldly vanity except it mostly just made you look like a walking, talking reminder that you had no choice. No sunblock, no hat, unless you fashioned one out of straw like a desperate scarecrow. No wonder monks looked perpetually miserable. They were dressed like they'd been beaten with a burlap sack and told to smile. And let's not forget the medieval fashion faux pas, the habit's tendency to sag, fray, and stain with the passage of time. It's like their clothes aged worse than a bottle of cheap wine, except instead of getting better with age, they just got more tattered, dirtier, and more depressing. The only thing more tragic than their wardrobe was the fact that they believed their drab appearance was a badge of spiritual superiority. Meanwhile, the rest of the world looked on, whispering behind their hands, "Look at those sad sacks. They look like they lost a bet with the wardrobe gods." So whether you're a peasant, a prince, or a monk, the message is clear. Medieval fashion was a bleak, monochrome joke. The toga envy? It's a myth. Monks didn't aspire to look like Roman senators. They aimed to look as unappealing as possible, to blend into the shadows of their own misery. Because in the medieval mindset, looking good was a sin unless it was the sin of vanity, and that was strictly reserved for the wealthy and the wicked. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas, the stains, and the unrelenting, soul-crushing dullness of your wardrobe. Welcome to the dark, drab, and downright depressing world of medieval monastic fashion. Your daily schedule as a medieval monk? Oh, it's a masterpiece of monotony, a symphony of suffering, a relentless march through the mud of misery, repetitive, soul-crushing, and designed to grind you into submission. Think of it as a divine comedy where the punchline is eternal drudgery. Wake up at dawn. If dawn means the moment the sun yawned itself awake and decided, hey, let's torture some poor souls. No alarm clocks here, just the cruel, unyielding glare of the rising sun sneaking through tiny, filthy windows to slap you awake. No snooze button, no coffee, no mercy. Your first order of business? Prayers. Lots of prayers. Hours of them. Not a gentle, contemplative, "Thank you, Lord," but a brutal, unending litany that stretches your throat like a medieval torture device. You mumble, you chant, you beg for mercy, all while your back protests like a grumpy old man, and your stomach rumbles louder than the church bell summoning you to service. Because in the monastery, prayer isn't an act of spiritual elevation. It's a mandatory endurance test. The monk's equivalent of a morning workout, except instead of sweating it out at the gym, you're sweating it out in a cold, damp stone cell, your voice echoing off ancient walls that have heard more suffering than a tavern full of angry sailors. And then brace yourself comes the work. Oh, the work. It's not light chores or light reading, no. It's the black hole of a schedule that sucks your soul into a pit of endless toil. You're a laborer, a janitor, a scribe, a gardener, a cook, a builder, a scapegoat for the universe's cruelty. You're pulling weeds in the swamp of your own despair or chipping stone until your hands look like they've been chewed by a pack of rabid wolves. You work until your back is a twisted coil of pain, sweat pooling in the crevices of your collar, your clothes soaked in a hot swamp of mystery ingredients, dirt, sweat, and the tears of saints. No matter the task, it's all bad. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. Lunchtime is no respite. It's a ritual of grim sustenance, miserable, meager, and usually shared with mice and the occasional rat, who have a better social life than you. You eat what's handed down, probably some bread that's as hard as a brick and as flavorless as a wet sock. Maybe a bit of cheese that's gone sour enough to make your face curl. Flavor comes from onions, salt, and pain. No sauces, no spices, just the bare minimum to keep your body from collapsing into a pile of bones and guilt. The meal is over in minutes. Because there's no time for savoring, there's more work, more prayers, more suffering to fit into the horizon of your day. And more work. Different work. The monotony of it is like being trapped in a never-ending relay race, except instead of running, you're shoveling, scrubbing, copying manuscripts that look like they were written in a drunken frenzy by a blindfolded scribe. The scribbling? It's not just copying. It's a form of medieval self-flagellation. Your hand cramps, your eyes bleed, and your concentration dissolves faster than a snowman in July. You're a peasant, a peasant, a peasant repeating that mantra to keep your mind from wandering into the abyss. Your eyes look like something pulled from a haunted crypt. And your smile? Well, it's more like a grimace pulled from the face of a condemned man. Gender roles? Oh, they're a joy. Women in monasteries are often confined to the cloister's shadow, tasked with sewing, brewing, or tending to the garden if they're lucky. Men, they're the ones wielding the tools, carrying the heavy burdens, and pretending they're the chosen ones. The whole system is a carefully choreographed nightmare of hierarchy, where your station is tattooed on your soul, and your dignity is auctioned off to the highest bidder. And so whether you're a male or female monk, your daily schedule is a relentless grind. The only difference is the flavor of your misery: more tears, more sweat, more silent screams. The afternoon, more work, more prayers, more suffering. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows that seem to mock your existence. The hours stretch like taffy, sticky with despair, until finally you're allowed to collapse into the straw-filled cot that smells like a battlefield of forgotten dreams. Small talk? Forget it. You're too exhausted to breathe, let alone exchange pleasantries. Your soul is drained, your body battered, and your mind a swirling vortex of, why me? With occasional flashes of, will this ever end? Night falls, but relief? It's a cruel illusion. Because after the day's misery, you're subjected to more prayers, vigilant, relentless, and punctuated by the scratching of fleas. No sleep is peaceful. No dreams are pure. Instead, your mind is haunted by visions of never-ending chores, the echo of the bell summoning you to yet another round of torment. And in the middle of the night, if you're lucky enough to get a moment of silence, you'll find that your thoughts echo back at you like a ghostly chorus. Asterisk. You're a peasant. You're a peasant. You're a peasant. Asterisk. So whether you're pulling weeds, copying scriptures, or just trying to find a moment of peace in a world designed to crush it out of you, the schedule is an unbreakable chain of misery, a daily grind that makes modern work look like a vacation. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? You're trapped in a medieval monastery, and the only escape is a miracle or maybe just a very long, very painful nap. Imagine being chained to a medieval lord's whim, a walking, breathing pawn in an elaborate game of survival where the rules are written in blood and the penalty for losing is pretty much eternal damnation or, more realistically, a slow, agonizing death. Welcome to the masterclass in outwitting the guy who owns you and his mother-in-law, just to keep things spicy. First, let's talk about the real estate. Your master owns the land, but more importantly, he owns you. You're a piece of chattel, a living, breathing commodity, and the game is how to keep breathing without losing your head or worse, your dignity. The game? Outwit, outlast, and occasionally outlie the guy with the power. Because if medieval life teaches anything, it's that your survival hinges on sneaky maneuvering, not honesty or virtue. Think of it as a giant, bloody game of chess, except the pieces scream, bleed, and sometimes get hacked apart in front of everyone. And your biggest challenge? The master's mother-in-law. Yes, that legendary villainess. She's the original medieval Karnak, except she's got a scepter, a household full of gossip, and a penchant for turning the tiniest mistake into a full-blown conspiracy. The moment you drop the ball, forget to fetch her herbs, spill wine on her embroidered cloak, or, heaven forbid, forget to bow properly, she's on you like a vulture on carrion. Her goal? To make your life a living hell, and if possible, to see you thrown into the dungeon for disrespect. Because in medieval times, respect wasn't just a social nicety. It was a matter of life and death. She'll whisper behind your back to the master, spin tales of how you're lazy, untrustworthy, or secretly plotting to overthrow the feudal order. Small talk? Try not to breathe too deeply around her unless you want your reputation reduced to a pile of rotten straw. So, how do you survive? First rule, don't give her a reason. Keep your head down. Smiles, fake. Eyes, watchful. Words, carefully measured, like a chemist mixing volatile ingredients. She's the original gossip monger, and her tongue is sharper than a rusty sickle. The trick? Master the art of the subtle dodge. Compliment her on her embroidery, but secretly hide a dagger in your words, metaphorically, of course. Flatter her vanity, but don't let her see your true thoughts, because if she smells rebellion, she'll turn you into a cautionary tale for other peasants. Meanwhile, you're also navigating the treacherous waters of toileting. Yes, toileting. Medieval toileting is a humiliation ritual. No toilet paper? Never heard of it. You squat over a hole in the ground, sometimes a wooden bench with a hole, sometimes a hole in the ground, sometimes a hole in the ground with a view of the countryside. No privacy, no dignity, just a hot swamp of mystery ingredients, feces, urine, and whatever else the local rats find tasty. Small comfort? Not much. You do the deed, then wipe with a rag or a handful of straw, wassoming you're lucky enough to have either. If not, well, you learn to accept that your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt, and your behind is basically medieval toast. And then there's the eating. The menu? A brutal parade of flavor from onions, salt, and pain. No gourmet chef here, just a cook with a broken palate and a penchant for boiling everything into a bland, gritty porridge. Food? Stale bread, tough meat from animals that roamed the same fields as your master's dog, and vegetables that look like they've seen better centuries. Flavor? Comes from onions, salt, and pain, the medieval equivalent of comfort food, if comfort involved suffering. You learn to eat quickly, not savor, because the next punishment might be a beating, or worse, being forced to eat something even more disgusting, like a rotten eel or a porridge made of mixed up, spoiled grains. Gender roles? Oh, they're a joy. You're a peasant, you're a peasant, you're a peasant. No matter your gender, your job is to serve, obey, and look as unthreatening as a weasel in a henhouse. Women? Subservient, silent, busy with chores, and often the target of abuse because, in the medieval mind, a woman's place was beneath a man's boot, preferably not in the way of his sword. Men? Expected to be tough, silent, and ready to fight at a moment's notice, though mostly they're just trying to survive the next day's beating or the next harvest of misery. And let's not forget the subtle art of outwitting death itself, because in medieval times, death is just a bad day away. Smallpox, the plague, or a random arrow from a wandering mercenary, all part of the package. Your best strategy? Play the long game. Lie low. Avoid the sheriff's eye. And certainly don't get caught doing something stupid like stealing bread or talking back to your lord, because the punishment for that isn't just a slap on the wrist. It's a trip to the gallows, or a slow, fiery death at the stake. But here's the kicker. Survival isn't just about dodging death. It's about crafting a web of alliances, keeping your mouth shut, and knowing when to smile like something from a haunted crypt. Because in the medieval jungle, the biggest predator isn't the wolf or the plague, it's the guy who owns you, his mother-in-law, and the unspoken rules that keep everyone in line. Outwitting them, that's your only shot at not being reduced to a pile of bones, or worse, forgotten in some damp cellar with rats for company. So whether you're a peasant or a baron, if you want to outlive the medieval chaos, you learn the art of the subtle, the sneaky, and the downright cunning. Because in this game, the only true survival skill is the ability to keep your head and, maybe, just maybe, to outsmart the guy with the scepter and the mother-in-law with the razor tongue. Love, sex, and other ways to get in trouble. Romance in chains. Ah, the sweet, forbidden fruit of medieval monastic life, part temptation, one part punishment, and a generous splash of pure chaos. Because nothing says divine devotion like locking yourself in a cell with a vow of chastity that's about as firm as a soggy biscuit. And yet, humans being humans, the desire for love and lust doesn't just evaporate into the monastery's drafty corridors. No, it simmers beneath the surface like a pot of stew left unattended, dangerous, sticky, and liable to boil over at the worst possible moment. So whether you're a monk swearing off carnal pleasures or a nun trying to ignore the faint, tantalizing whispers from the nearby village, romance in chains was less a choice and more an ongoing guerrilla warfare against your own flesh. Let's start with the obvious. Celibacy in the Middle Ages. It's like telling a fish not to swim or a cat not to knock over vases. Impossible. The monks? They tried. Oh, they tried. They'd chant. They'd pray. They'd whip themselves into a frenzy of spiritual purity. But let's be honest, your body is a sneaky little rebel. It craves what it craves, and denying it just makes it louder. Rumors, gossip, secret meetings behind a cloister wall. Welcome to medieval Tinder minus the swipe, plus the risk of hanging, excommunication, or worse. Because if you got caught, you weren't just a sinner, oh no. You were a scandal, a walking, talking cautionary tale. Imagine the abbot's face when he caught Brother John whispering sweet nothings to Sister Mary through a crack in the stone wall. The horror, the shame, the faint smell of burnt incense, and badly suppressed laughter. And speaking of clandestine encounters, let's not forget the infamous cloister rendezvous, sneaking off to the woods, the secluded garden, maybe even a cellar if you were daring enough. It's basically medieval spycraft, but with less technology and more desperate whispered promises. Because monks and nuns, despite their vows, had the same cravings as anyone else. Only their version involved more secrecy, more guilt, and a lot more hiding behind prayer books when the coast was clear. The thrill? Off the charts. The risk? Medieval death penalty, or at the very least, a good flogging and eternal damnation. No wonder they developed such elaborate schemes using false walls, secret signs, and code words that would make a spy blush. It's like a soap opera written by someone who really, really hates happy endings. But here's the kicker. Even when they managed to indulge, it was never simple. No, medieval love was a twisted game of how to get caught and still pretend you're holy. For nuns, the temptation was all the more scandalous. Imagine trying to suppress feelings when your entire environment screams celibacy, but your hormones are doing the samba. The convent? It's a high-security prison with a dash of forbidden fruit hanging just out of reach. Love letters? Think parchment and ink, smuggled past the guard like priceless contraband. Secret meetings? A risk worth taking if it meant a fleeting moment of passion, like a firefly flickering in a graveyard. And what about those tragic love stories? The ones where lovers met in secret, only to be caught, punished, and then forever haunted by their own desire? Medieval romance was less a story of love and more a cautionary tale about how to get obliterated by guilt. And the women? Oh, the women. They were the real rebels locked in a convent, but their minds? Wild, creative, and just as likely to plot a daring escape as they were to secretly exchange love poems with a handsome outsider. Imagine the scene. A nun, clutching a stolen letter, heart pounding like a drum in a silent cathedral, knowing full well that if caught, she'd be exiled, whipped, or worse, maybe even burned at the stake if her love was deemed too scandalous. Love in chains? Try love in a cage, with the key thrown into the abyss. But love always finds a way, even in the bleakest circumstances. It's like a stubborn weed that refuses to die, sprouting between the cracks of stone walls, whispering promises of freedom that only the brave or the foolish would believe. And let's not forget the final act of medieval romance, the tragic, poetic death of love itself. Because if you got caught, the punishment wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was exile from the community, the loss of reputation, and a lifetime of shame. Your smile looks like something yanked from a haunted crypt. Your love reduced to a ghost story told around the fire if you survived at all. The monks and nuns knew love was a dangerous game, a risky gamble where the house always wins, and the house was the church, with its ironclad rules and the ever-present threat of eternal damnation. No wonder they turned to prayer anything to drown out the siren call of flesh and focus on the divine. Because in the Middle Ages, romance was less about passion and more about punishment, a twisted dance where desire was both the music and the jailer. In the end, love in medieval monastic life was a tapestry woven with shadows, secrets, and guilt. It was a game of hide and seek with your own desire zone you'd always lose, but keep playing anyway. Because human nature doesn't just vanish behind vows and vows alone. It sneaks in through the cracks, whispers in the dark, and if you're not careful turns you into a legend of forbidden love, forever tangled in chains you'd never willingly wear. You think the Colosseum was just a fancy Roman stadium filled with cheering crowds and a few lions? Think again. Oh no. The reality? The Colosseum was a meat grinder of human suffering, a gladiatorial bloodbath turned spectacle, sure, but also a twisted form of medieval-style entertainment that, if you squint hard enough, was basically medieval in spirit. Because whether it was a peasant dragged out into the arena or a monk forced to watch, you can bet your life that the entertainment was less about fun and more about pain, humiliation, and the kind of spectacle that makes your stomach turn even today. Imagine this. You, a peasant or a monk, or maybe just some unlucky soul caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Suddenly, the gates open, and a lion, a bear, or some other ferocious beast, starved and raring to go, is unleashed upon you. The crowd? They're not just watching, they're actively rooting for your demise. Because in this brutal theater, the only thing more entertaining than watching someone die is watching someone die painfully. And the crowd's bloodlust? It's a hot swamp of mystery ingredients, fear, voyeurism, social power, and a dash of sadistic glee. Your screams? They're the soundtrack to their amusement. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. But let's not dwell on the fleas. Instead, consider the spectacle itself, a form of entertainment so barbaric it makes modern reality television look like a gentle yoga class. The crowds? They're not just there to watch a fight, they're there to witness suffering as if it's some divine comedy. To them, your pain is a punchline that echoes through the ages, delivered with the enthusiasm of a jester who's lost all sense of humor. And the gladiators? They're not just fighters, they're performers, actors in a tragic play where the script is written in blood and the applause is drowned out by the screams. So whether you're a peasant, a monk, or just a wandering traveler, the Colosseum's entertainment wasn't just about spectacle, it was about spectacle with a side of suffering. Because in the Roman arena, pain wasn't an unfortunate side effect, it was the main event. The gladiators? They didn't get a choice either. No, they were cast as tragic heroes in a grotesque parody of heroism, fighting not for glory but for survival. And the audience? They cheered as if the suffering of others was some divine right, a gift from the gods, a ritual of the gods' own twisted amusement. But wait, it gets better. The entertainment didn't end with lions and gladiators. Oh no, medieval amusements were equally brutal as lions. More, let's see who can survive the longest without dying from boredom, disease, or their own feces. Imagine a knight in shining armor, or what's left of it, watching a jester slip on a banana peel of human misery. Or a monk, forced to witness a game where the prize was a swift death or eternal shame. The spectacle was less about entertainment and more about social control, a reminder that if you stepped out of line, the crowd's laughter or worse, their silence would be your ultimate punishment. And let's not forget the twisted humor of it all, because in medieval times, entertainment often meant humiliation, and humiliation meant public exposure. You'd be paraded around like a prize pig, your misery on full display, your dignity shredded faster than a monk's prayer book. Your face, probably twisted into a grimace that looks like a haunted crypt, was the punchline of the show. It's the kind of entertainment that makes you question what kind of sick minds thought it was a good idea to turn suffering into spectacle, because, apparently, that's what the medieval mind did best. Remember, in this dark carnival, there was no safety net, no break from the horror. The main event was often a gruesome combination of torture, spectacle, and societal reinforcement. Watching someone's limbs get hacked off? That was a weekend. Watching a monk try to hide his disgust while a peasant was forced to dance for the amusement of the local lord? That was a Tuesday. And the crowd? They roared with approval, because they thrived on chaos, on pain, on the kind of entertainment that would make a modern horror film seem tame. So whether it was the bloody arena, the public execution, or the grotesque pageant of medieval fairs, these weren't just entertainment venues. They were the stages of a brutal, unrelenting theater of cruelty. And if you think your Netflix binge is bleak, just remember, in medieval times, the entertainment was a never-ending series of public humiliations, tortures, and blood-soaked spectacles. The punchline? There wasn't one. Just a never-ending visceral reminder that, in the Middle Ages, suffering was the main course and everyone eagerly ordered seconds. Spying, snitching, and secret societies. The slave grapevine. Ah, the medieval version of who's got dirt on whom, except instead of a friendly game of gossip, it's a lethal web spun with the precision of a spider on meth. So whether you're a peasant sweating in the fields or a monk kneeling in your scriptorium, you're always 1 foot away from being a rat, a mole, or a double-crossing cog in the grand conspiracy of medieval espionage. Welcome to the secret society of the ages where trust is a myth and silence is your only weapon or your lethal mistake. Let's start with the premise. The Middle Ages was basically a giant, blood-soaked game of telephone played with knives and broken promises. Every monastery, castle, and village was a hot swamp of mystery ingredients, rumors, secrets, and half-truths simmering away in the bubbling cauldron of medieval paranoia. Your neighbor? Probably a spy. Your friend? Maybe a snitch. Your own shadow? Possibly an informant on the payroll of some power-hungry lord or a jealous rival monk with a grudge sharper than his conscience. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. The medieval monk, in particular, was a walking, talking, secret-keeping machine. Bound by vows of silence, sure, but also by an unspoken contract to snitch faster than you can say confession. Think about it. Monks were the medieval version of corporate whistleblower sex sept. Instead of a cozy office, they had cloisters, and instead of a paycheck, they had a lifetime of suspicion and secret scrolls. Their job? To spy on heretics, political enemies, and even fellow monks who might be plotting a coup against the abbot. If you thought your office gossip was ruthless, try imagining the whispered gossip of a monastery, where every prayer could be a cover for a conspiracy, and every silence could be a loaded gun. And oh, the secret societies. The Masons? Medieval monks and nobles had their own clandestine, club-shidden alcoves, coded texts, and covert handshakes that would make your modern conspiracy theory look like child's play. These weren't just social clubs, they were political powerhouses, playing a dangerous game of chess with lives and kingdoms. The secret part? It was a joke. Everyone knew everyone was in on it, except, of course, the peasants, who were too busy dodging manure and trying not to get their heads chopped off to care. These societies thrived on secrets, on the thrill of the forbidden, on the power of knowing what others desperately wanted to hide. Your vote, your voice, your very existence, all potentially up for grabs in this shadowy game of who knows what, and who's willing to sell it. Now, let's talk about the grapevine, the medieval version of social media, only with fewer emojis and more executions. Word traveled like wildfire, but with a twist. It often came with a price. You could whisper something in a dark corner, and if someone overheard or guessed wrong, your life could spiral into a Kafkaesque nightmare faster than you can say heretic. The entire countryside was a network of spies, informants, and traitors, all feeding information into the great hive mind of suspicion. It's like modern Facebook, but instead of likes and cat memes, it's who's plotting treason and which peasant is secretly a spy for the king. Small talk? Try not to breathe too deeply, someone might take your words as treasonous. And the worst part? The authorities loved it. Lords, bishops, and kings thrived on these secret networks. They had their own spies, sometimes monks, sometimes loyal peasants, who kept tabs on everyone from the local blacksmith to the visiting merchant. The more secretive and suspicious, the more powerful they felt. It was a giant game of guess who, with lives hanging in the balance. If you were caught whispering about your landlord's latest tax hike, off to the rack with you. If you dared to criticize the church, well, let's just say heretics weren't exactly invited to tea parties. The entire medieval system was built on a fragile balance of secrets, lies, and betrayals, like a house of cards made of rotten timber and fragile parchment. And let's not forget about the methods. Oh, the methods. Hidden messages in religious texts, coded symbols carved into stone, secret hand signals passed during mass anything to keep the grapevine flowing without the prying eyes of the authorities. Monks, for instance, were masters of disguise, writing clandestine notes in the margins of illuminated manuscripts, slipping messages into the holy water, or even muttering coded prayers that only the initiated could understand. The entire espionage game was played out in whispers, in shadows, in the corners of monasteries where the flickering candlelight was the only witness. It was like a medieval spy thriller, only with less budget and more damp stone walls. And so, in this treacherous landscape, trust was a currency more rare than gold, more valuable than a bishop's blessing. Your neighbor, a potential traitor. Your friend, a snitch in disguise. Your own shadow, possibly an informant. The grapevine was a slave, a master, a poisoner, an omnipresent force that turned every handshake into a handshake of suspicion. Medieval society was less about stability and more about survival, and survival meant knowing who to watch, who to betray, and who might be waiting for you to slip so they could shove you into a dungeon or worse. Because in the Middle Ages, secrets weren't just dangerous, they were deadly. And the secret society of spies, it was the most dangerous game of all, played with lives, faith, and the fragile illusion of trust. And that, my friend, is the true power of the slave grapevine. Chaos disguised as order, betrayal cloaked in piety, and a never-ending game of hide and seek, where everyone is both hunter and hunted. Welcome to the medieval secret society, where the only thing more dangerous than a sword was the whisper behind your back. So, you think being a medieval monk was all sweet serenades and endless candle-lit contemplation? Think again, because if you're picturing a life of pure spiritual freedom, a divine escape from the chaos of feudal chaos, think again. Freedom? Don't get your hopes up. The truth? It was about as free as a caged raven in a monastery tower, dangling from a rusty chain, while the abbot's staff tapped a relentless rhythm of control. Let's start with the idea of manumission. You know, the grand concept of being freed. Sounds promising, right? Like a get-out-of-jail-free card, but for souls. Wrong. Because in the medieval world, manumission was more a game of bureaucratic roulette than a guaranteed ticket to liberation. You could buy your freedom if you had enough gold, enough influence, or enough luck. But more often than not, freedom was a myth wrapped in parchment, inked with promises that evaporated faster than your last meal after a long fast. Some monks, desperate for a break, tried to escape. Think of it as an elaborate medieval jailbreak. They'd plot, they'd sneak out at night, hide in hay carts, or hide beneath cloaks so threadbare they might as well have been invisible. But the walls were thick, the guards relentless, and the punishments? Oh, they ranged from flogging to outright excommunication, meaning your soul was just as trapped as your body. And let's not forget the runaways. Oh yes, the monks who thought, hey, maybe I can bolt for the woods, find some freedom, breathe fresh air, maybe even see a bird or two without a prayer in sight. Spoiler, they didn't get far, because monasteries, like medieval prisons with better lighting, had guards, sometimes a few monks with a grudge, sometimes hired watchmen who knew how to spot a fleeing friar faster than you can say heresy. The woods? A lush green paradise unless you're a monk with no map, no supplies, and a stomach growling like a beast. Because the moment you step outside the cloister, you're entering a world that's just as oppressive but with more bugs and fewer vows of chastity. And what about the Great Escape fantasy? Oh, the story's legends spun around flickering candle flames of monks who made it out, who broke the chains of monastic life and vanished into the sunset. Fictional, of course. because in reality, the Great Escape was more like a fleeting mirage, a tempting illusion that vanished as soon as the guards caught wind of the plan. Some monks, those who dared to dream big, would hide in secret tunnels, disguise themselves as peasants, or even try to bribe someone with a shiny coin or two. But the odds? Like trying to swim through a river of molten lead. Because the monastery walls weren't just stone, they were psychological prisons, walls of guilt, obedience, and fear. Break out? Sure. But then what? The world outside was a hot swamp of mystery ingredients, disease, bandits, starvation, and the ever-present threat of being dragged back or worse, branded a heretic. And yet, the allure of liberty persisted. The fantasy of being free to do what you want, when you want, no longer tethered to prayers, vows, or a life of drudgery. But let's face it, freedom in the Middle Ages was a lie served with a side of brutal reality. Because whether you're a peasant or a monk, the chains of societal expectation, physical pain, and spiritual servitude were woven into the very fabric of existence. Monks? They were supposed to be free from worldly temptations. Instead, they got a prison of silence, perpetual labor, and endless ritual. They traded one cage for another, only this one was painted with holy words, cloaked in sanctity, and guarded by guilt. And what about the illusion of choice? They'd be told they could choose their path, be a priest, a scholar, a scribe, like it was all freedom of the will. But the truth? The only choice they had was which chain to wear. The vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience weren't just ideals, they were enforced commandments. Break one, and you risk damnation, exile, or worse, public shame that stuck to your soul like spilled ink on parchment. So whether you're a monk who secretly dreams of a tavern, a girl who dreams of love, or a peasant wishing for a day without famine, your options? Limited, narrower than a slit in a monk's habit. And let's not forget the spiritual prison, the worst kind of captivity, because even if you managed to escape the physical walls, your mind was still shackled to the doctrines of sin, salvation, and the omnipresent gaze of the divine. Every thought, every desire, every flicker of rebellion was a sin waiting to happen. Freedom? Please. That was an illusion, a mirage pulled over your eyes by the church's gilded propaganda machine. You could run, but your soul, still caught in the web of ecclesiastical control, spinning endlessly in the dark. So whether you're a monk plotting your clandestine escape or a prisoner of your own spiritual chains, the bottom line is clear. The Middle Ages didn't do freedom, not really. They did control, obedience, and the illusion of choice. Because in the end, even the so-called free monks were just prisoners of a different kind, locked inside a monastery, inside a script, inside a story written by someone else. Freedom? Don't get your hopes up. The best you could hope for was a quiet, unnoticed, decent escape from the eternal grind, but only if fate, luck, and the guards all conspired just right. And even then, the ghosts of the cloister would haunt your dreams long after the walls crumbled. So, you're dead. Congratulations. The afterlife benefits package? Oh, it's a real delight if you enjoy being haunted, scorned, and politely ignored by whatever spectral bureaucracy somehow manages your soul's eternal fate. Welcome to the grand, cosmic version of, sorry, your application has been rejected. But instead of a polite letter, you get an eternity of ghostly mischief, spectral paperwork, and haunting your ex, master's nightmares. Think of it as medieval karma, but with more moaning and less accountability. First, let's talk about the ghostly perks, because nothing screams reward like lingering as a translucent, semi-corporeal annoyance. Medieval religion, that big old cosmic scam, promised you heaven if you played your cards right, but the reality? A limbo of endless purgatory, or a fiery eternity that makes hell's hot tub seem like a spa day. So whether you're a monk or a peasant, chances are your afterlife is less peaceful paradise and more spectral souvenir shop. You're dead, but your ghost, it's stuck in an endless loop of haunting your former monastery, your old master, and that one annoying squire who never learned how to sweep the crypt properly. Your afterlife's like a never-ending episode of Haunted House, but with less budget and more existential dread. And what do ghosts do? They haunt, they moan, they flicker through walls like malfunctioning neon signs. Your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt because Honestly, what else would it be? Your spectral form is a patchwork quilt of unresolved grievances, unfulfilled prayers, and that nagging suspicion that you forgot to turn off the oven before you croaked. Your afterlife benefits? A never-ending opportunity to haunt your ex, master's dreams, to scare the living daylights out of the monks who once looked down on you, and to remind them that yes, they should have paid you more. The spectral version of overdue rent, but with more wailing and less money. And the best part? Ghosts are forever, eternal, unkillable, and eternally pissed off. Like a medieval customer service line that never ends except, instead of talking to a human, you're stuck in an endless loop of boo and get off my grave. Your ghostly existence is a perpetual middle finger to the divine, a spectral middle finger that flickers in the moonlight, whispering sarcastic insults about how your life was a medieval hell, and now your afterlife is just the same, but with more ectoplasm. Let's circle back to your ex-master because, naturally, that's where the real fun begins. You haunt them. You haunt their dreams. You haunt their sleep, their food, their very thoughts. The ghostly afterlife isn't just about wandering aimlessly through the mist, no, it's about actively tormenting the living. You're a spectral vigilante with a grudge, a poltergeist with a vendetta. Your presence? An unholy symphony of disembodied whispers, flickering candles, and the occasional inexplicable cold spot in the chamber of their soul. You're a ghostly reminder. You could have been kinder. You could have paid me that extra coin. Now I'm stuck here, making your life a haunted crypt. And those haunting moments, they escalate. You start to mess with their stuff, knock over goblets, rattle chains, whisper secrets in Latin they don't understand. Small tricks at first, like misplaced keys or flickering candles. But then, oh then, you elevate to full-blown spectral chaos, doors slamming, beds shaking, shadows darting just out of sight. You're not just haunting, you're creating a medieval ghostly version of a "you've got mail" spam campaign. But instead of emails, it's relentless, sinister apparitions whispering, "You're next," followed by a spooky giggle that echoes through the stone corridors. And let's not forget the ghostly funeral benefits. You can linger around their grave, a permanent reminder of their sin-san incorporeal billboard of divine justice. You can sit on their tombstone, stare at them through a misty veil, and make sure they know exactly what they've lost. Every time they try to rest, you haunt them with spectral nightmares, visions of hellfire, divine retribution, the eternal regret of not being a better master, a better monk, a better human. Because in medieval afterlife politics, the ghostly benefits are less about eternal bliss and more about eternal payback. And, naturally, as a ghost, you have all the time in the world. No sunblock, no hat, unless you've fashioned one out of straw like a desperate scarecrow. No need to eat, drink, or breathe, just endless, relentless, petty revenge. You're the ultimate cosmic prankster, the medieval version of a ghostly stand-up comic, except your punchline is eternal torment. Your afterlife isn't about heavenly choirs or angelic choirs. It's about staying forever pissed off, a spectral middle finger waving in the face of divine order. So whether you're a monk, a peasant, or a baron, the afterlife benefits package is a spectral nightmare, perfectly tailored for those who dared to cross the divine. Ghosts haunt your every step, your every thought, your very soul. They remind you spectrally, sarcastically, that the universe has a wicked sense of humor. And the punchline? You're stuck in an eternal, haunted purgatory, haunting your ex-master forevermore. Because in the medieval afterlife, the real benefit? Being a ghostly pain in the divine ass forever. Congratulations, you've made it to the grand finale of medieval monkdom, except, surprise, you're still a slave. A slightly better dressed, marginally more enlightened slave, sure, but a slave nonetheless. And the real kicker? Now you know more than your master. Oh yes, knowledgeing, intoxicating, dangerous, and utterly inconvenient thing has just turned your life into a bureaucratic nightmare, dipped in spiritual guilt and ecclesiastical red tape. Let's start with the obvious. Your master, that beady-eyed, parchment-licking overlord of your soul, doesn't need much from you beyond obedience, silence, and a willingness to accept that your body is a temple except when it isn't, which is most of the time. But now you've uncovered the secret. the truth about the universe, the divine, and the fact that the church's holy texts are about as reliable as a used chariot wheel. So, whether you're praying in Latin or trying to decipher the scribbles on a manuscript, you're aware deep down that you're a cog in a giant, cosmic, well-meaning scam. And you, the medieval monk, the so-called spiritual seeker, the keeper of sacred knowledge, are still chained just with a different set of shackles. You think you're enlightened? Think again. The more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. It's like discovering that the Holy Grail is actually a moldy cup of ale, and that the divine is less about celestial light and more about how many days you can go without washing your robe. You're still a slave, but now you're a slave with a scroll of forbidden truths tucked into your tunic, smirking at the powers that be. Your enlightenment doesn't free you. It complicates your existence. You understand that the church is less about salvation and more about control, about keeping you pacified with promises of eternal paradise while they hoard the gold, the power, and the secrets. You realize that the saints are just medieval celebrities, their halos painted on with gold leaf and their miracles curated like a medieval version of Instagram. You see through the smoke and mirror sexcept, of course. Your master sees everything, including your newfound skepticism. So whether you're secretly questioning the divine right of kings or pondering whether the bread really turns into Christ or just moldy leftovers, you're still a prisoner of the system, just one who knows too much. The worst part? Your knowledge doesn't give you a shortcut out of the dungeon. No, it's more like handing a torch to a ratcher. You can see the rats in the walls, but that doesn't mean you can escape. You still have to bow to the abbot, kneel before the relic, and pretend that your stomach isn't churning from the unwashed, disease-ridden conditions. Because in the medieval monastery, toileting is a humiliation ritual. No toilet paper? Never heard of it. You squat over a communal hole in the ground, your bare skin making contact with a hot swamp of mystery ingredients leftovers, fleas, and the collective despair of monks who've been at it since the Crusades. And speaking of bodily functions, let's not forget the joys of medieval hygiene. Your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt because, well, it is. You're a monk. You're a peasant. You're a peasant who's been told that cleanliness is next to godliness. But the reality is that soap, if you even get soap, is a luxury, and water is in such short supply that it's easier to just accept the stench. So whether it's the unwashed hair, the foul breath, or the persistent itch from fleas that are basically medieval Wi-Fi, you're still a slave to your own body's filth. Now, let's talk about gender, because in the medieval monastery, gender roles are not just a thing, they're the law. Women? They're essentially mythical creatures or temptresses lurking just outside the cloisters. Men? They're the chosen vessel of salvation, unless they're heretics, in which case they're a walking, talking chaos engine ready to explode at a moment's notice. You learn that your role is preordained, that your destiny is carved in stone, and that any deviation, be it questioning authority, expressing individual thought, or daring to think outside the sacred boxes, met with punishment, exile, or worse, eternal damnation. And yet, somehow, despite all this, despite the chains of ignorance, the stench of unwashed robes, and the cruel game of ecclesiastical chess, you're still aware. You've cracked the code. You've seen through the curtains, peeked behind the velvet drapes, and realized that the whole religious spectacle is just a medieval con game. That's what makes it so deliciously tragic. Knowledge is your shackles, but it's also your weapon. You're a prisoner with a key, a slave who's just discovered the lock. So here's the punchline. You're still a slave, but now you're a slave who knows the truth, and that makes all the difference. Because once you've seen through the latrines, you understand that the divine power is just a medieval PowerPoint presentation. You're no longer blindly obedient. You're a rebel in a robe, a heretic with a scroll, a monk who's realized the real holy mystery, the elaborate scam that keeps everyone trapped in a spiritual hamster wheel. And the best part, you're not alone. You're part of a secret society, the enlightened few who know that the emperor has no clothes, that the pope is just a dude with a fancy hat, and that the true power belongs to the ones who control the narrative. The church's greatest trick? Making you think you're saved while secretly holding the keys to your mind, your body, and your very soul. But now you know better. you've got the knowledge. You've got the truth. And that, my friend, is the greatest slap in the face to the medieval system. Because once you know, there's no going back. You're a slave, yes, but you're a slave who's just discovered that the master is actually a con artist with a really bad hair day. And that's a revolution worth laughing about, if only you had the guts to do so aloud, instead of whispering in the dark, plotting your next move in the grand, absurd game of medieval chess.